She wrote the letter that should have killed her. Instead, it changed a kingdom. Riella Vance never imagined her rage-fueled words would reach the Alpha King's hands, or that he'd appear at her door days later, not with executioners, but with a question that shattered everything she believed. What happens when the woman everyone cast aside becomes the one voice a tyrant learns to trust? When the outcast from the borderlands stands before the throne and refuses to kneel. Stay until the end to see how a she-wolf with nothing left to lose became the Luna no one saw coming. Like this video if you love stories of underdogs who rewrite their own fate, and comment what city you're watching from. The cabin stank of mildew and old smoke. Riella Vance sat at the warped kitchen table, her pen scratching across stolen parchment like claws on stone. Outside, wind howled through the pines, rattling the shutters she'd patched with scrapwood 3 winters ago. The candle flickered. Her hand didn't. She wrote with the fury of someone who had nothing left to lose. To the so-called Alpha King, you call yourself a ruler, but you're a coward hiding behind marble walls while your people starve. The borderlands bleed and you do nothing. Children die of fever you could prevent with a single shipment of medicine. Farmers lose entire harvests because the roads you promised to repair remain death traps. You are not a king. You are a tyrant who has abandoned those you swore to protect. We don't need your pity. We need you to do your damn job. Someone who remembers what honor used to mean. Riella's jaw clenched as she signed it. Not with her name. Never her name. She wasn't stupid enough to hand him a reason to come after her. Though part of her, the part that still remembered who she used to be, almost wanted him to try. She folded the letter once, twice, creasing it with sharp precision. It would never be sent. This was just therapy, a way to bleed out the poison before it consumed her completely. The door banged open. Riella's hand went to the knife at her belt before she even registered who stood there. Cade Merrick, tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of smile that had once made her stomach flip. Now it just made her tired. "You should knock," she said flatly. "I did. You didn't hear me." He stepped inside, shaking snow from his coat. His eyes, pale gray like dirty ice, swept the room and landed on the letter. "What's that?" "Nothing." "Doesn't look like nothing." She should have put it away. Should have shoved it into the drawer with the other unsent letters, the other futile screams into the void. But exhaustion made her slow. Cade moved faster. He snatched it off the table before she could react. "Give it back." Riella stood, her chair scraping loud against the floor. Cade unfolded it. His eyes scanned the words, and then he smiled. Not the warm smile she remembered from years ago, back when they'd trained together at the Capitol, back when she'd been someone. This smile was cold, calculated. "You really wrote this?" He looked up, eyebrows raised. "To the Alpha King? I said give it back." "This is treason, Riella." "It's a piece of paper I was about to burn. Don't be dramatic." But Cade's smile widened. He folded the letter carefully and slid it into his coat pocket. "You know what I think? I think you're right. Someone should tell him the truth." Ice slid down her spine. "Cade?" "Maybe I'll deliver it for you." Her hand shot out, grabbing his wrist. Her grip was strong, stronger than most wolves gave her credit for. But he didn't flinch. Just looked down at her fingers like they were an amusing inconvenience. "Don't," she said quietly. "Please." "Why not? You clearly believe every word." "Because it'll get me killed, and you know it." Cade tilted his head, studying her with that same detached curiosity he'd shown the day she'd been stripped of her rank and exiled to this frozen wasteland. The day he'd stood in the crowd and said nothing, done nothing. "Maybe," he said, "or maybe it'll finally get you what you've been begging for all these years. Attention." He pulled his wrist free and walked out, the letter still in his pocket. Riella stood frozen in the doorway, watching him disappear into the snow. Her breath came in short, sharp bursts. She could chase him, could try to take it back by force. But Cade was a ranked wolf, still in good standing with the Capitol. She was nobody, a disgraced officer living in a one-room cabin at the edge of the known world. If she attacked him, it would only make things worse. She slammed the door and pressed her forehead against the rough wood, eyes squeezed shut. "Idiot," she whispered. "You stupid, reckless idiot." The fire in the hearth crackled. Outside, the wind screamed. 3 days passed. Riella spent them waiting for soldiers to arrive, for the knock on the door that would mean chains, a trial, and probably a noose. She barely slept. Every sound made her jump, branches breaking under snow, an owl's distant call, the creak of the cabin settling. Nothing came. On the 4th day, she forced herself to leave the cabin. The village needed her, even if it didn't particularly want her. She'd spent the last 2 years carving out a fragile existence here, hunting game for families too weak to do it themselves, fixing roofs, hauling water when the well froze. Nobody thanked her. Most still remembered who she used to be. Captain Riella Vance, the rising star who'd been caught falsifying reports and taking bribes. Except she hadn't. But proving that required evidence she didn't have and a voice no one would listen to. The village square was busier than usual. A small crowd had gathered near the message board, murmuring and pointing. Riella's stomach dropped. She pushed through the crowd. A royal proclamation hung on the board, the king's seal pressed into red wax at the bottom. By order of His Majesty, Alpha King Davion Ashcroft, emergency provisions will be distributed to the borderland territories effective immediately. Road repairs will commence within the fortnight. A royal inspector will arrive to assess further needs and address ongoing concerns. Riella stared at the words until they blurred. It couldn't be real. Guess someone finally got through to him, a voice muttered behind her. About damn time, another said. She turned slowly, scanning the crowd. Old Mara stood near the well, arms crossed, her expression skeptical. Joran, the blacksmith, read the notice again, lips moving. A few children chased each other around the square, oblivious. None of them knew. None of them had any idea that the letter, her letter, might have done this. Riella's hands started shaking. She shoved them into her pockets and walked away before anyone could see. The provisions arrived 2 days later. 3 wagons, loaded with grain, salted meat, medicine, and blankets. Real blankets. Not the threadbare rags people had been sharing. The village erupted in a chaos of gratitude and disbelief. Riella watched from the edge of the square, her arms crossed, her heart pounding. He'd actually listened. The tyrant king, the man who supposedly didn't care about the borderlands, had listened to her. Or maybe it was a coincidence. Maybe this had been planned for weeks, and the timing just happened to line up. Maybe she was delusional for thinking her words had mattered at all. She turned to leave, and froze. A man stood at the far end of the square, tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in dark traveling clothes that didn't quite hide the quality of the fabric or the unmistakable military bearing in the way he stood. Their eyes met across the crowd. Riella's breath caught. She knew that face. Everyone in the kingdom knew that face. It had been carved into statues, painted in portraits, stamped on coins. Alpha King Davion Ashcroft stood in her village square, watching her with an expression she couldn't read. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then he started walking toward her. Panic shot through her veins like lightning. She could run, should run, but her legs refused to cooperate, rooted to the frozen ground as the king of the entire realm closed the distance between them. He stopped 3 feet away. Up close, he looked different than the portraits, older, harder. His dark hair was streaked with silver at the temples, his jaw shadowed with stubble. Scars crossed his knuckles. His eyes, pale gold, like winter sunlight through ice, pinned her in place. Riella Vance, he said. His voice was low, rough-edged, like gravel underfoot. She swallowed. Your Majesty. The corner of his mouth twitched, not quite a smile. You wrote me a letter. Her heart slammed against her ribs. I don't know what you're... Don't! He held up one hand. I didn't come here for lies. The square had gone silent. Everyone was staring now. Riella could feel their eyes like brands on her skin. Walk with me, the king said. It wasn't a request. She followed him away from the crowd, past the cluster of cabins, toward the tree line. Her mind raced. He could have her arrested right here, could drag her back to the capital in chains, could execute her in front of the entire village as an example. But he didn't reach for a weapon, didn't call for guards. When they were far enough from listening ears, he stopped and turned to face her. I want the truth, he said. Riella's jaw tightened. About what? Everything. The borderlands. What's really happening here? What I've been too blind to see. She stared at him. You came all this way to ask me that? I came because your letter was the first honest thing anyone said to me in years. His expression didn't soften, but something shifted in his eyes, something that might have been exhaustion. Everyone else is too afraid to tell me when I'm failing. You weren't. I didn't sign it. I know. Your friend Cade Merrick was very helpful in identifying the handwriting. Of course he was. Riella's hands curled into fists. She should have seen that coming, should have burned the letter the second she finished writing it. So what happens now? She asked. Public execution, quiet disappearance? The king's expression darkened. Is that what you think of me? I don't know you. Then let me be clear. He stepped closer, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to hold his gaze. I didn't come here to punish you. I came because you were right. About all of it. And I need to know what else I'm missing. Riella's pulse hammered in her throat. This had to be a trap. It had to be. Kings didn't travel hundreds of miles to have honest conversations with disgraced exiles. Why me? She asked. Because you have nothing to gain by lying to me. No rank to protect, no favor to curry. You're the only person in this kingdom who doesn't need something from me. He paused. That makes you valuable. She laughed, a short, bitter sound. I'm not valuable. I'm a disgrace. Ask anyone. I don't care what they say. I care what you know. For a long moment, she just looked at him, searching for the trick, the angle, the moment where this would all fall apart and reveal itself as the cruel joke it had to be. But all she saw was exhaustion and something that looked almost like desperation. You really want the truth? She asked. Yes. Fine. She crossed her arms. The roads aren't just bad, they're deliberately sabotaged. Merchants pay tolls to local enforcers who pocket half and send the rest up the chain. Medicine shipments get lost and resold on the black market. The last 3 inspectors you sent were bribed before they even left the capital. And the reason nobody tells you this is because everyone who benefits from the corruption has friends in your court. The king's jaw tightened, but he didn't interrupt. Riella kept going, the words pouring out like poison she'd been storing for years. Children are dying because your supply lines are a joke. Families are starving because your tax collectors take more than the law allows and nobody stops them. You want to know what's really happening out here? We've been abandoned, and we've learned to survive in spite of you, not because of you. Silence fell between them, heavy as snow. Then the king said, Who do I need to remove? Riella blinked. What? Names. Give me names and I'll handle it. She stared at him. You're serious? Do I look like I'm joking? He didn't. His expression was granite hard, his eyes blazing with something that looked like fury. But not at her. At the situation. At himself. Slowly, carefully, Riella started talking. She gave him names, dates, specific incidents she'd witnessed or heard about, things she'd kept buried because speaking up before had gotten her exiled, and she'd learned the hard way that honesty was a luxury only the powerful could afford. But the king didn't stop her, didn't tell her she was exaggerating or being dramatic. He listened to every word, his expression growing darker with each revelation. When she finally ran out of things to say, he was silent for a long moment. Then he said, Come to the capital. Riella's stomach dropped. No. I need you there. I'm not going back to that place. Why not? Because the last time I was there, I was humiliated in front of the entire court, stripped of my rank, and exiled for crimes I didn't commit. Her voice cracked and she hated herself for it. I'm not walking back into that nightmare. The king's expression softened, just slightly. What if I could prove you were innocent? Her breath caught. You can't. Maybe I can, if you're willing to help me dig. She wanted to say no, wanted to tell him to take his offer and his promises and leave her alone. She'd built a life here. It wasn't much, but it was hers, and it was safe. But the look in his eyes made her hesitate. He wasn't lying. She could see that much. Whatever he was offering, he believed it. Why do you care? She asked quietly. Why does it matter if I was innocent or not? Because I've been ruling based on information I can't trust. And if they lied about you, they've lied about other things. He paused. I need people around me who aren't afraid to tell me the truth, even when it's ugly. Riella closed her eyes, her mind spinning. This was insane. She'd be walking into a den of wolves who hated her, armed with nothing but the word of a king who might change his mind the second it became inconvenient. But if there was even a chance, even the smallest possibility, that she could clear her name— "One condition," she said. The king raised an eyebrow. "You're negotiating with me?" "Yes. If I do this, I want full access to the records from my trial. All of them. No redactions, no lost documents. I want to see everything." He studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Done. And if I find proof I was framed, I want the people responsible held accountable. Publicly." "Agreed." She let out a shaky breath. "Then I'll come." The king extended his hand. Riella stared at it for a long moment, then clasped it. His grip was firm, calloused, the hand of someone who'd spent more time holding a sword than a scepter. "We leave at first light," he said. She nodded, her heart pounding. As he walked away back toward the village square where his guards were waiting, Riella stood alone in the snow and wondered if she'd just made the best decision of her life, or signed her own death warrant. That night, Riella packed the few belongings she owned: a spare shirt, a worn cloak, the knife her father had given her before he died. She moved mechanically, her mind numb. A knock sounded at the door. She opened it to find old Mara standing on the threshold, wrapped in a shawl and scowling. "Heard you're leaving," Mara said. "News travels fast." "It's a small village. We don't have much else to talk about." Mara's sharp eyes swept over the cabin. "Going back to the capital?" "Apparently." "Stupid move," Riella almost smiled. "Probably. They'll eat you alive?" "They've tried before," Mara snorted. Then she reached into her shawl and pulled out a small bundle wrapped in cloth. "Here." Riella took it, surprised. Inside were 3 apples, real ones, not the shriveled things that grew wild in the forest, and a chunk of hard cheese. "You didn't have to—" "Don't get sentimental. I just don't want to hear about you starving on the road." Mara turned to leave, then paused. "For what it's worth, some of us never believe the stories about you." Riella's throat tightened. "Thank you." Mara waved a dismissive hand and disappeared into the darkness. Riella closed the door and leaned against it, the bundle clutched to her chest. Maybe she wasn't as alone as she'd thought. Dawn broke cold and merciless. Riella stood in the village square, her pack slung over one shoulder, watching the king's entourage prepare to leave. Horses stamped and snorted, their breath fogging the air. Guards moved with quiet efficiency, checking saddles and supplies. The king approached, leading a gray mare. "Can you ride?" "Yes." He handed her the reins. "Stay close. The roads aren't safe." She swung into the saddle, her body remembering the motion even after years away from formal training. The horse shifted beneath her, testing her weight. Cade Merrick stood near one of the wagons, watching her with that same cold smile. Riella met his gaze and didn't look away. Let him smile. Let him think he'd won. She was done running. The king mounted his own horse, a massive black stallion that looked like it could trample a wolf without breaking stride, and raised one hand. "Move out!" The entourage began to move, a slow procession of horses and wagons winding through the village and onto the frozen road beyond. Riella didn't look back. She kept her eyes forward, fixed on the road ahead, and tried not to think about what waited for her at the end of it. The capital loomed in her mind like a scar that had never quite healed. The place where she'd lost everything. The place where her enemies still whispered her name like a curse. But she wasn't the same woman who'd left in disgrace. She'd survived 2 years in the harshest territory in the kingdom. She'd endured cold, hunger, and isolation. She'd learned to rely on herself when no one else would. If they wanted to break her again, they'd have to try a lot harder this time. The king rode beside her, his expression unreadable. "Nervous?" he asked. "Terrified," she admitted. He almost smiled. "Good. Fear keeps you sharp." "Is that supposed to be comforting?" "No. It's supposed to be true." They rode in silence for a while, the forest closing in around them. Snow fell in lazy spirals, dusting the trees and the road. "Can I ask you something?" Riella said. "Go ahead." "Why did you really come to the borderlands yourself? You could have sent someone." The king was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Because I needed to see it with my own eyes. I've been ruling from reports and secondhand accounts for too long. I wanted the truth, even if it made me uncomfortable. And did it? Yes. He glanced at her. Your letter didn't just insult me, it woke me up. Riella looked down at the reins in her hands. I didn't think anyone would ever read it. I'm glad someone did. They fell silent again, the rhythmic clop of hooves the only sound. Riella's mind drifted to what lay ahead. The court. The nobles. The people who destroyed her reputation and celebrated her exile. She'd have to face them all. But this time, she wouldn't be alone. This time, she had the one thing she'd never had before, someone in power who believed her. Whether that would be enough to survive what came next, she didn't know. But she was damn well going to find out. The capital rose from the horizon like a beast made of stone and ambition. Riella had forgotten how massive it was. Towers that clawed at the sky, walls thick enough to withstand siege engines, streets that sprawled in every direction, like veins feeding a hungry heart. She'd once loved this place. Now it felt like riding toward her own grave. The gates opened without ceremony. Guards saluted the king, their eyes sliding past Riella like she was furniture. Good. The less attention, the better. They rode through streets she remembered too well. The market square where she'd once bought honeyed bread after morning drills. The barracks where she'd earned her first commendation. The palace steps where she'd stood in chains while they stripped her of everything. Her hands tightened on the reins. Easy, the king said quietly. He'd been watching her since they crossed into the city. We'll go through the private entrance. Afraid someone will see me? Afraid someone will start asking questions before I'm ready to answer them. They veered left, away from the main courtyard, and entered through a smaller gate half hidden by ivy. The stables here were quieter, cleaner. A groom appeared immediately to take the horses. Riella dismounted, her legs stiff from days of riding. The king gestured toward a side door. This way. She followed him into the palace, her heart hammering. The halls were narrower here, less grand, servant corridors. He was keeping her hidden, smart or cowardly, she wasn't sure which. They climbed a spiral staircase and emerged into a hallway lined with doors. The king stopped at one and pushed it open. You'll stay here. Riella stepped inside and froze. It wasn't a cell. It was a room. A real room. With a bed that had actual blankets, a desk by the window, a wardrobe that probably wasn't empty. Sunlight streamed through glass panes, glass, not oiled parchment, and the floor was polished wood, not dirt. This is adequate, I hope, the king said. She turned to face him. Why? Why what? Why are you doing this? The room, the... She gestured vaguely. All of it. You don't owe me anything. His expression didn't change. I owe you the truth. That starts with treating you like someone who matters. Before she could respond, he continued. Get some rest. Tomorrow we start digging into your case. He paused at the door. And Riella? Don't leave this room unless I send for you. The court doesn't know you're here yet, and I'd like to keep it that way until I understand what we're dealing with. The door closed behind him. Riella stood alone in the middle of the room, her pack still slung over her shoulder, and tried to remember how to breathe. She didn't sleep. Every creak of the floorboards outside her door sent adrenaline spiking through her veins. Every distant voice made her wonder if someone had discovered her presence. She paced the room until her legs ached, then sat by the window and watched the palace grounds below. Nobles strolled through manicured gardens. Servants hurried between buildings. Guards changed shifts with military precision. Everything looked so orderly, so civilized. She'd forgotten how much she hated it. A knock startled her from her thoughts. Come in, she called, hand already on her knife. The door opened. A young woman entered carrying a tray. She had dark hair pulled into a severe bun, and the kind of neutral expression servants learned to wear around unpredictable nobles. His Majesty sent breakfast, the woman said, setting the tray on the desk. Riella eyed the food, bread that was actually soft, eggs that steamed, fruit that didn't have frost on it. Her stomach growled traitorously. Thank you. The servant hesitated. Do you need anything else, miss? Information. The woman's eyes widened slightly. I'm not sure I put... Relax. I'm not asking for state secrets. Riella sat on the edge of the bed. Just tell me what people are saying. About the king, about recent events. The servant glanced toward the door, clearly weighing the risk. Then she said quietly, "There's talk about the aid sent to the borderlands. Some of the nobles aren't happy about it. Why not? They think His Majesty is wasting resources on lost causes." Her voice dropped even lower. "And there are rumors he's brought someone back from exile. Someone controversial." So word was already spreading. Riella's jaw tightened. "Do they know who?" "Not yet, but people are guessing. Let me guess. They're not guessing anything flattering." The servant's silence was answer enough. After she left, Riella forced herself to eat. The food tasted like ash, but she needed the strength. Whatever came next, she couldn't afford to be weak. The king sent for her late that afternoon. A guard escorted her through the palace, and Riella kept her head down, hood pulled up. They passed clusters of nobles who didn't spare her a glance. Just another servant on an errand. The guard stopped at a heavy oak door. "His Majesty is inside." Riella pushed it open and stepped into what looked like a war room. Maps covered the walls. Documents were stacked on a massive table. And standing at the center of it all, studying a ledger with the focus of a predator tracking prey, was the king. He looked up. "Close the door." She did. "What is this?" "Your case files. Everything from the original investigation." He gestured to the table. "Start reading." Riella approached slowly, her eyes scanning the documents. Witness statements, evidence logs. Her own testimony, transcribed in someone else's handwriting. Seeing it all laid out like this, cold, clinical damning, made her stomach churn. "What am I looking for?" she asked. "Inconsistencies, gaps, anything that doesn't add up." She picked up the first document, a statement from Lord Corvin, one of the senior logistics officers. He'd accused her of accepting bribes to reroute supply shipments. She remembered that interrogation. Remembered Corvin's smug expression as he detailed her supposed crimes. Remembered wanting to lunge across the table and break his nose. "This is fabricated," she said flatly. "Prove it." She set the document down and picked up another. Then another. Each one painted her as corrupt, dishonest, willing to sell out her own people for money. None of it was true, but the evidence looked airtight. "They were thorough," she muttered. "Too thorough," the king said. He pulled out a chair and sat, steepling his fingers. When someone is actually guilty, investigations are messy. Witnesses contradict each other. Evidence is incomplete. This, he gestured to the pile, is too clean, like someone wrote a script and everyone followed it perfectly. Riella looked at him. "You think it was coordinated?" "I think someone wanted you gone badly enough to orchestrate an entire conspiracy." "Why?" "That's what we need to figure out." She pulled out a chair and sat across from him, her mind racing. "Who benefits from me being exiled?" "Anyone you posed a threat to." "I was a captain. I didn't have that kind of power." "You had something better. You had a reputation for honesty." The king leaned forward. "Think about it. You were known for following regulations to the letter, for refusing bribes, for reporting misconduct, even when it made you unpopular. If someone was running a scheme and you got too close, they'd need me silenced." The pieces clicked together with sickening clarity. "The supply routes." The king's eyes sharpened. "What about them?" 6 months before my trial, I started noticing discrepancies in the shipment logs. Medical supplies that were supposed to reach the borderlands but never arrived. Grain shipments that were listed as delivered but the villages reported receiving nothing. She stood, pacing. I reported it to my superior officer. He told me to drop it, said I was seeing problems where there weren't any. "Who was your superior?" "Commander Thane." The king's expression darkened. "He's dead." Riella stopped pacing. "What?" "Died 3 months after your trial. Hunting accident." A chill ran down her spine. "That's convenient." "Extremely." They stared at each other across the table, the weight of implication settling like stones. "If Thane was involved," Riella said slowly, "and someone wanted to make sure he stayed quiet, then we're not just looking at corruption. We're looking at murder." The room felt colder. Riella wrapped her arms around herself, her mind spinning. She'd spent 2 years believing she'd been destroyed by bureaucratic cruelty and bad luck. The idea that it had been deliberate, That someone had cared enough to frame her, exile her, and then kill anyone who might expose the truth was almost too much to process. "Who else knew you were investigating?" the king asked. "Just Thane." "I didn't want to make accusations without proof." "Smart. It's probably why you're still alive." The bluntness of it hit her like a fist. She sat back down, her legs suddenly unsteady. The king stood and moved to the window, his hands clasped behind his back. "I'm going to ask you something, and I need you to be honest. Haven't I been? Do you want revenge, or do you want justice?" Riella considered the question. Revenge would be satisfying, watching the people who destroyed her suffer the way she'd suffered. Justice would be harder, messier. It would mean trials and evidence and due process. "Justice," she said finally. "Revenge is just another way of saying I'm still letting them control me." The king turned, and for the first time, something like approval crossed his face. "Good answer." A knock interrupted them. "Enter," the king called. A man stepped in, tall, with gray hair, and the bearing of someone who'd spent a lifetime giving orders. He wore the uniform of a high-ranking advisor. "Your Majesty, the council is asking—" He stopped, his eyes landing on Riella. His expression shifted from professional neutrality to cold recognition. "You." Riella stood. "Councillor Brandt?" "What is she doing here?" Brandt looked at the king. "Sire, this woman is a convicted criminal." "She's a guest," the king said sharply. "And you'll address her with respect." Brandt's jaw tightened. "With all due respect, Your Majesty, her presence here is highly irregular. The council will have questions." "Then they can ask me directly." "They're asking now. They want to know why you've been spending hours locked in this room with a disgraced officer instead of attending to state matters." The king's expression went glacial. "Tell the council I'll address them when I'm ready. Not before." Brandt hesitated, clearly weighing his options. Then he bowed stiffly. "As you wish." He left, and the tension in the room ratcheted up another notch. "That could have gone better," Riella muttered. "He's going to tell everyone you're here." "I figured." The king turned to face her fully. "This is your last chance to walk away. Once the council knows, there's no going back. You'll be thrown into the middle of a fight you might not survive." Riella met his gaze. "I stopped running 2 years ago. I'm not starting again now." For a moment, something flickered in his eyes. Respect, maybe. Or recognition. One fighter acknowledging another. "Then we do this properly," he said. "Tomorrow, you'll stand before the council and tell them everything, and I'll make sure they listen." Chat. That night, Riella couldn't sleep again. She sat by the window, watching moonlight paint the palace grounds in silver, and tried not to think about what tomorrow would bring. A soft knock made her turn. "It's open," she called. The door cracked, and the servant from earlier slipped inside. She looked nervous. "I probably shouldn't be here," the woman said. "Then why are you?" She pulled a folded piece of paper from her apron and held it out. "Someone paid me to deliver this to you. I don't know who. They were hooded, and they left before I could ask questions." Riella took the paper, her instincts screaming danger. She unfolded it carefully. "You should have stayed in exile. Some truths are better left buried. No signature, no identifying marks." Her hands didn't shake. She'd gone past fear into something colder. "Thank you for bringing this to me," she said quietly. The servant nodded and hurried out. Riella read the note again, then walked to the fireplace and dropped it into the flames. She watched it curl and blacken, the words disappearing into ash. Whoever sent it wanted her afraid. They'd have to try harder. The council chamber was exactly as she remembered. High ceilings, marble columns, rows of seats arranged in a semicircle like an arena. Except this time she wasn't standing in chains. She was standing beside the king, and that changed everything. The council members filed in, their expressions ranging from curious to hostile. Riella recognized most of them. Lord Corvin, who'd testified against her. Lady Morel, who'd called her a disgrace to the uniform. Chancellor Dren, who'd signed her exile papers with barely concealed satisfaction. They took their seats, and the whispering started immediately. The king raised one hand, and silence fell. "I've called this session to re-examine the case of Captain Riella Vance," he said. His voice carried through the chamber like a blade. "New evidence suggests her conviction was based on fabricated testimony." The room erupted. "This is outrageous. Your Majesty, with all due respect, she was tried fairly. The king's voice cut through the chaos like a whip crack. You will be silent, or I will clear this chamber. The room went quiet, but the hostility remained thick enough to choke on. Captain Vance, the king said, turning to her, tell them what you told me. Riella stepped forward, her heart pounding but her voice steady. She'd faced worse than angry nobles. She'd survived exile. She'd survived 2 years of cold and hunger and loneliness. She could survive this. 6 months before my trial, she began, I discovered discrepancies in supply shipment logs. Medical supplies and food that were supposed to reach the borderlands were disappearing. I reported this to Commander Thane. He told me to drop it. When I didn't, I became a target. Lies, Corvin said, standing. You were caught accepting bribes. There were witnesses. Witnesses you paid, Riella shot back. Or threatened, or both. How dare you, Hat? Sit down, Lord Corvin, the king said coldly. Corvin sat, but his expression promised violence. Riella continued. The evidence against me was too perfect, too coordinated. Someone wanted me gone, and they made sure it happened. She looked directly at Corvin. The question is, who benefits from keeping the borderlands starved? Who's been profiting from stolen shipments while people die? The silence that followed was absolute. Then Chancellor Dren stood. Your Majesty, these are serious accusations. Do you have proof? The king gestured to a stack of documents on the table. We're gathering it, but what we have so far raises enough questions to warrant a full investigation. And in the meantime, Dren asked, what is her status? She's under my protection. Anyone who has a problem with that can take it up with me directly. The threat hung in the air. Lady Morell rose, her voice dripping venom. Your Majesty, surely you see how this looks. You disappear to the borderlands and return with a convicted criminal who claims to be innocent. You lock yourself away with her, refuse to meet with your advisors, and now you're demanding we overturn a lawful conviction based on what? Her word against the testimony of respected officers. My word, the king said, carries more weight than theirs. With respect, sire, it shouldn't, not without evidence. Riella's fists clenched. Morell was right, and that made it worse. They had suspicions, inconsistencies, and theories, but they didn't have proof. Not yet. I propose a compromise, Counselor Brandt said, standing. Allow Captain Vance to remain in the capital under supervised conditions while the investigation continues. If proof of her innocence emerges, we revisit the conviction. If not, he didn't finish the sentence. The king looked at Riella. She gave a small nod. Agreed, the king said, but I want full transparency. Every document, every witness statement, everything related to her case will be reviewed. By whom? Dren asked. By me. The council exchanged glances. They didn't like it, but they couldn't refuse, not openly. Very well, Dren said. We'll reconvene in 1 week to assess progress. The session ended, and the council filed out, their whispers resuming the moment they thought the king couldn't hear. Riella stood alone in the center of the chamber, her legs shaking with adrenaline. The king approached. You did well. I didn't do anything. They still think I'm guilty. They think you're a threat. That's better. She looked at him. How is that better? Because people who aren't threats get ignored. You just made them very, very nervous. He started toward the exit. Come on. We have work to do. They spent the next 3 days buried in records, shipment logs, financial statements, personnel files. Riella's eyes burned from reading and her back ached from hunching over documents, but she didn't stop. Slowly, patterns emerged. Supplies that went missing always passed through the same checkpoints. The officers in charge of those checkpoints all reported to the same superior, and that superior had received a significant promotion right after Riella's exile. Got you, she whispered, circling a name on the document. The king looked up from his own pile. What? She slid the paper across the table. Captain Yoren. He was in charge of the eastern checkpoint. Every missing shipment went through his station. The king studied the document. He's been promoted twice since your trial. He's a commander now. Rewarded for his loyalty. Or his silence. Riella stood, pacing. We need to talk to him. He won't confess. Maybe not. But people make mistakes when they're nervous. If we push hard enough, A knock interrupted her. The guard outside opened the door. "Your Majesty, there's been an incident." The king's expression sharpened. "What kind of incident?" "A fire. In the records building." Riella's blood went cold. The king was already moving. "Show me." They ran through the palace corridors, Riella struggling to keep up. By the time they reached the courtyard, smoke was billowing from a building across the grounds. Servants formed bucket lines, frantically trying to douse the flames. Guards shouted orders. Chaos reigned. The king grabbed the nearest officer. "What happened?" "We don't know, sire. It started in the archives section. Spread fast." The archives, where the original records from Riella's trial were stored. She and the king locked eyes. "This wasn't an accident," she said. "No, it wasn't. Someone was destroying evidence. Someone who knew they were getting close." The king turned to the officer. "I want guards on every entrance to this palace. No one leaves without my permission, and I want a list of everyone who entered that building in the last 24 hours. "Yes, sire." As the officer ran off, Riella stared at the burning building, rage and frustration warring inside her. They'd been so close, and now someone had just burned their proof to ash. The king's hand landed on her shoulder. "This isn't over. They destroyed everything. They destroyed the originals. But I had copies made 3 days ago." His expression was grim. "I've been expecting something like this." Hope flared in her chest. "You did?" "I didn't get to be king by trusting people." He turned away from the fire. "Come on, we're not waiting for them to make another move." "What are we doing?" "We're going to arrest Commander Yorn, tonight." They moved fast. The king assembled a small team of guards he personally trusted, soldiers who'd served with him in the field, who owed their loyalty to him alone. Riella rode beside him, her heart pounding as they galloped through the city streets toward Yorn's estate. They arrived just before midnight. The mansion was dark, most of the windows unlit. Guards stood at the entrance, but they snapped to attention when they saw the king. "Open the gate," the king commanded. The guards obeyed without question. They dismounted in the courtyard, and the king strode toward the main entrance like a storm given form. The door opened before he could knock. A servant, wide-eyed and terrified. "Your Majesty, we weren't expecting to—" "Where is Commander Yoren?" "In his study, sire, but—" The king pushed past him. Riella followed, her hand on her knife. They moved through opulent hallways filled with expensive art and imported furniture, the kind of wealth no military officer should have on their salary. The study door was ajar. The king kicked it open. Commander Yoren looked up from his desk, a glass of wine halfway to his lips. He was a broad man, with thinning hair and the soft edges of someone who'd grown comfortable in his position. His eyes widened when he saw the king. Then they landed on Riella, and his face went pale. "Your Majesty," he stammered, setting down the glass. This is unexpected." "You're under arrest," the king said. Yoren's mouth opened and closed like a fish. "On what charges?" "Theft, conspiracy, treason." The king stepped closer. "And if you're smart, you'll start talking before I add execution to that list." "I don't know what you're—" "The shipments, Yoren. The ones you rerouted and sold on the black market. The ones you blamed on Captain Vance when she got too close." Yoren's eyes darted to Riella, and she saw the calculation there, the desperate search for a way out. "She's lying," he said. "She's a criminal trying to— Save it!" The king gestured to the guards. "Take him." 2 soldiers moved forward, grabbing Yoren's arms. He struggled, panic replacing the earlier bluster. Wait, I can explain." "You'll explain in a cell." As they dragged him away, Riella moved to the desk. Papers were scattered across the surface. Letters, financial records, shipping manifests. She picked up one of the letters and read it. Her hand started shaking. "What is it?" the king asked. She handed him the letter without a word. It was addressed to Lord Corvin, and it detailed exactly how much money he'd made from the stolen shipments, and how much he'd paid to ensure Riella's conviction. The king's expression went deadly. "We have them." Riella nodded, unable to speak past the fury choking her. They had them, and this time there would be no escape. The king held the letter like it might bite him. His knuckles went white around the edges of the paper, and for a moment Riella thought he might tear it to pieces. Instead, he set it down carefully on Yoren's desk, his movements controlled in a way that made her more nervous than shouting would have. "How many others?" he asked quietly. Riella was already sorting through the remaining documents. Letters, ledgers, receipts for payments that should never have existed. Her hands moved faster, pulling out anything that looked incriminating. "At least 5 names I recognize," she said. "Maybe more. Some of these are coded." The king leaned over her shoulder, scanning the papers. Corvin, Morel, Brandt. He stopped. Thane. So the commander had been dirty after all. Riella felt a sick sort of vindication. She'd trusted him once, reported the discrepancies to him like a good soldier, and he'd sold her out to protect his own neck. "They killed him anyway," she said. "Dead men don't talk, but they also don't collect their share." The king straightened. "Gather everything. We're taking it all back to the palace." One of the guards stepped forward. "Your Majesty, shouldn't we secure the premises first? If Commander Yoren has allies here, then they're about to have a very bad night." The king's voice could have frozen water. "Search every room. If you find anyone trying to destroy evidence or flee, detain them." The guards scattered. Riella kept sorting, her mind racing. This was bigger than she'd imagined, not just a few corrupt officers skimming supplies, but a network that reached into the council itself. People who'd sat in judgment of her, who'd condemned her with false righteousness while lining their pockets with stolen money. "We need to move fast," she said. "Once word gets out that we arrested Yoren, they'll scatter like rats." The king pulled a document from the pile and held it up to the light. "Or they'll come for us." "Let them." He looked at her, one eyebrow raised. "You sound eager." "I've been running from these people for 2 years. I'm done running." Something shifted in his expression. Approval, maybe, or recognition. "Good, because what comes next is going to get ugly." They loaded everything into saddlebags, enough evidence to fill 3 horses. By the time they finished, dawn was bleeding across the horizon, painting the sky in shades of blood and gold. The ride back to the palace was tense. Riella kept expecting an ambush, arrows from the rooftops, something. But the streets remained empty, the city still sleeping. They made it to the palace gates without incident. "Too easy," she muttered. The king dismounted. "I know." They carried the evidence inside through the same private entrance they'd used before. No servants, no witnesses, just the 2 of them and a handful of guards the king trusted with his life. In the war room, they spread everything across the table. Letters, ledgers, shipping manifests with forged signatures. A paper trail so damning it could topple half the council. "We need to arrest them all," Riella said, "tonight, before they realize what's happening." "We can't." The king rubbed his face, exhaustion showing for the first time. "Some of these people have private armies. If we move too fast, we could trigger a civil war. And if we move too slow, they'll destroy the evidence and disappear." "I know." The frustration in his voice matched her own. They had the proof, they had the names, but power was more complicated than just being right. "What if we force their hand?" Riella asked. "What do you mean?" "Make them come to us. Call an emergency council session. Confront them publicly with the evidence. They'll either confess or try to fight their way out. Either way, we'll know who's loyal and who's not." The king considered this, his eyes distant. "It's risky." "Everything worth doing is." He almost smiled. "You're starting to sound like a strategist." "I had a good teacher once, before he sold me out." The smile faded. "We do this, and there's no going back. You understand that? You'll be painting a target on yourself that will never disappear." Riella met his gaze. "I've had a target on my back since the day I reported those discrepancies. At least this time I'll be the one shooting back." The king nodded slowly. Then he turned to one of the guards. "Send word to the council. Emergency session. 1 hour. Attendance is mandatory." The guard saluted and left. Riella's heart started pounding. 1 hour. That was all the time they had to prepare for what might be the most dangerous gamble of her life. "Get ready," the king said quietly. "This is going to get bloody." The council chamber filled faster than Riella expected. Nobles arrived in various states of dress, some fully formal, others clearly dragged from their beds. They took their seats with expressions ranging from curious to deeply annoyed. Lord Corvin entered last, his face carefully neutral, but Riella saw the tension in his shoulders, the way his eyes scanned the room like a predator sensing danger. He knew something was wrong. The king stood at the center of the chamber, Riella beside him. On the table in front of them sat a single stack of documents. "Thank you for coming on such short notice," the king said. His voice carried through the space, calm and measured. "I've called this session because new evidence has come to light regarding systematic corruption within our supply networks." The room went very still. "Over the past week," the king continued, "Captain Vance and I have been investigating discrepancies in shipment logs. What we found was a conspiracy that spans multiple departments and reaches into this very council." Murmurs rippled through the chamber. Chancellor Dren stood. "Your Majesty, these are serious accusations. I hope you have substantial proof." "I have confessions." The king's voice cut like a blade. "From Commander Yoren, who was arrested last night for theft, conspiracy, and treason." The murmurs turned to open shock. Corvin remained seated, but his hands gripped the armrests of his chair hard enough to turn his knuckles white. "Commander Yoren has provided detailed testimony," the king said, "implicating several members of this council in a scheme to divert supplies meant for the borderlands and sell them for personal profit. He also confirmed that Captain Vance's conviction was orchestrated to silence her when she discovered the theft." "This is outrageous!" Lady Morell shot to her feet. "You expect us to believe the word of an arrested criminal over this?" The king held up one of Corvin's letters. "A signed confession detailing exactly how much you paid to have Captain Vance framed?" Morell's face went ashen. Riella stepped forward, her voice steady despite the rage burning in her chest. "For 2 years, I lived in exile for crimes I didn't commit. I watched people starve because supplies that should have reached them were stolen by the very people sworn to protect them. And every single person in this room who participated in that scheme is going to answer for it." "You have no authority here," Corvin said, finally standing. His voice dripped contempt. "You're a disgraced officer playing at being relevant again. This is nothing but a desperate attempt to—" "To what?" Riella took a step toward him. "Clear my name? Expose the truth?" "You're right. That's exactly what this is, and it's working." Corvin's face twisted. "Your Majesty, surely you see through this charade. She's manipulated you." "Enough!" The king's voice rang out like a hammer on stone. "You will sit down, Lord Corvin, or I will have you removed in chains." For a moment, it could have gone either way. Corvin stood there, trembling with fury, his hand drifting toward the ceremonial sword at his hip. Then Councillor Brandt stood. "Your Majesty," Brandt said carefully, "while I appreciate the thoroughness of your investigation, surely we should follow proper procedures. Form an investigative committee. Review the evidence in closed session." "No." The king's voice was flat. "This ends now. Today. In full view of this council and the people it's supposed to serve." "You're talking about arresting council members," Brandt said. It requires my authority as king, which I'm exercising." The tension in the room ratcheted up another notch. Riella could feel it pressing against her skin, could see the calculations happening behind every pair of eyes. Who would stand with the king? Who would fight? Corvin made his choice. He drew his sword. "This is treason," he snarled. "You're destroying this council based on lies from a convicted criminal. I won't stand for it." Guards moved immediately, surrounding him. But Corvin wasn't alone. 3 other council members stood, their hands on their weapons. The chamber erupted into chaos. "Stand down!" the king roared. "No!" Corvin's eyes were wild now, all pretense of civility gone. "You want a war? You've got one!" He lunged, not at the king, at Riella. She saw it coming, barely. Years of training kicked in as she dodged left, her hand going to her knife. Corvin's blade whistled past her ear, close enough that she felt the wind of it. She didn't think, just moved. Her knife came up, catching Corvin's wrist. He howled, his sword clattering to the floor. She kicked it away and drove her shoulder into his chest, sending him stumbling backward into the arms of waiting guards. The other 3 who'd drawn weapons hesitated, seeing their leader subdued. "Drop your weapons," the king commanded. "Now!" One by one, they complied. The chamber went silent except for Corvin's ragged breathing and the sound of steel being sheathed. The king looked around the room, his expression carved from ice. Is anyone else interested in resisting arrest? No one moved. Good. He gestured to the guards. Take them. All 4. They'll be held until trial. As the guards dragged them away, Corvin twisted in their grip, his eyes locked on Riella. This isn't over. You think you've won, but you're just a pawn. When the real players move, you'll be the first to fall. Riella stared back at him, her knife still in her hand. I'm looking forward to it. They hauled him out, still shouting threats. The remaining council members sat in stunned silence. The king turned to them. Let me be clear. Anyone else involved in this conspiracy has one chance to come forward. Confess now, and you'll face justice. Stay silent, and when we find you, and we will find you, there will be no mercy. No one spoke. Session adjourned. The aftermath was chaos. News spread through the palace like wildfire. By midday, the entire capital knew that 4 council members had been arrested for treason. Rumors flew, some accurate, most wildly exaggerated. Riella spent the day giving testimony to investigators, walking them through every detail of what she'd found. Her throat was raw from talking by the time they finally let her go. She retreated to her room and collapsed on the bed, every muscle aching. A knock woke her hours later. She'd fallen asleep still dressed, her knife under the pillow. Come in, she called, sitting up. The king entered, looking as exhausted as she felt. We need to talk. What happened? Corvin's lawyers are already filing appeals, claiming the arrest was unlawful, that the evidence was obtained improperly, every legal trick they can think of. He sat in the chair by the window. And they have a point. Some of what we did was questionable. We had probable cause, we had suspicions, and a letter from a man we arrested under duress. A good lawyer can tear that apart. Riella's stomach sank. So they might walk? Unless we get more evidence, something that can't be challenged in court. Like what? The king was quiet for a moment. Then he said, There's word coming from the borderlands. An attack. Raiders hit 3 villages in the past week, burned crops, killed livestock, terrorized the people. Riella stood, adrenaline spiking. How bad? Bad enough that we need to respond. I'm sending a battalion. They leave tomorrow. I'm going with them. No. Your Majesty. Riella, you're the key witness in the biggest corruption trial this kingdom has seen in decades. I can't risk you getting killed by raiders. Those are my people, the villages I lived near for 2 years. You think I'm going to sit here safe in the palace while they're under attack? Yes, that's exactly what I think you're going to do. She stepped closer, her voice dropping. With respect, you can't order me to stay. I'm not part of your military anymore. Then I'm asking, as someone who needs you alive. The raw honesty in his voice stopped her. She studied his face, seeing the exhaustion there, the worry he was trying to hide. Why do you care? She asked quietly. Because in the past week, you've been the only person who's told me the truth without flinching. I need that. The kingdom needs that. He stood, and because you've become someone I don't want to lose. The weight of those words hung between them. Riella looked away, her chest tight. I can't just sit here, not while people are dying. Then come up with a better plan. One that doesn't involve you charging into a war zone. She paced the room, thinking. The raids were too convenient. Right when they'd arrested Corvin and his allies, right when the corruption scandal was about to blow wide open, suddenly the borderlands were under attack? It's a distraction, she said. What? The raids. They're meant to pull your attention away from the trials. Force you to choose between pursuing justice here and protecting the borderlands. The king's eyes sharpened. Or it's retaliation. The people we're investigating have connections to the black market. They could have hired the raiders as punishment for interfering. Either way, we can't ignore it. No, we can't. He moved to the window, staring out at the darkening sky. But if I send troops, I'm playing into their hands. If I don't, I'm abandoning the borderlands again. Riella stood beside him. What if you do both? How? Send the battalion like you planned, but send me with them, not as a witness, as a scout. I know that territory better than any of your officers. I can help them move faster, avoid ambushes, protect the villages more effectively. You'll be a target. I'm already a target. At least this way, I'm a moving one. The king turned to look at her, and she saw the conflict in his eyes. Logic warring with something else, something that looked almost like fear. If anything happens to you, it won't. You can't promise that. No, but I can promise I'll fight like hell to come back. She held his gaze. These people destroyed my life. I'm not giving them the satisfaction of making me hide. For a long moment, he just looked at her. Then he nodded once, sharp and decisive. You ride with the battalion, but you stay with the main group. No heroics, no unnecessary risks. Understood. I mean it, Riella. This isn't about proving yourself, it's about survival. I know. He didn't look convinced, but he didn't argue further. We leave at dawn. Get some rest. After he left, Riella stood at the window and watched the city lights flicker to life below. Tomorrow she'd be riding back to the place she'd barely escaped, back into danger she'd spent 2 years avoiding. But this time, she wouldn't be alone. This time she'd have an army at her back and a purpose beyond just surviving. This time, she was going to finish what she started. The battalion assembled before sunrise. 200 soldiers, armed and ready, their breath fogging in the pre-dawn cold. Riella mounted her horse, checking her weapons for the third time. Knife on her belt, bow across her back, sword she'd been issued strapped to the saddle. The king appeared, fully armored. Riella stared. "What are you doing?" she asked. "Leading my troops." "You can't. This is too dangerous." "So you've said. About yourself." Repeatedly. He swung into the saddle of his black stallion. "Turns out I'm just as stubborn." Riella wanted to argue, but the set of his jaw told her it would be pointless. "You're going to get yourself killed." "Not if you do your job and keep me alive." Despite everything, she almost smiled. That wasn't part of the deal. Consider it an amendment. The battalion moved out, a river of soldiers and horses flowing through the capital gates. People lined the streets to watch them go, their faces worried. Word of the raids had spread. Everyone knew what was at stake. They rode hard, covering ground fast. The king pushed the pace, and Riella found herself impressed despite her worry. He rode like someone who'd spent years in the saddle, not a ruler used to comfort. They made camp the first night in a clearing surrounded by pine forest. Riella helped set up the perimeter, her instincts screaming that they were being watched. "You feel it too?" The king appeared beside her, his voice low. "We're not alone out here." "How many?" "Can't tell, but enough to make me nervous." He nodded. "Double the watch tonight, and stay close to the command tent." "I'm not hiding behind Riella." His hand caught her arm, stopping her. "Please, for once, just listen to me." The raw concern in his voice made her pause. She nodded reluctantly. But she didn't sleep, couldn't. Every sound made her hand drift to her knife. Every shadow looked like a threat. Around midnight, the attack came. Arrows rained from the darkness, thudding into tents and supply wagons. Men shouted, horses screamed. Chaos erupted across the camp. Riella rolled out of her bedroll, grabbing her bow. She could see shapes moving in the tree line, raiders using the forest as cover. "Form up," the king's voice rang out. "Shields forward." The soldiers moved with practiced efficiency, forming defensive lines. But the raiders kept coming, wave after wave, using hit-and-run tactics that made them hard to pin down. Riella climbed onto a wagon for a better vantage point. She knocked an arrow, breathed, and released. A raider fell. She knocked another target down. But there were too many. And they weren't just attacking randomly. They were targeting the command area, targeting the king. She saw it happening. 3 raiders breaking through the defensive line, heading straight for the command tent. The king was there, directing the defense, unaware of the threat at his back. Riella didn't think. She jumped off the wagon and ran. "Behind you!" she screamed. The king turned, saw the raiders, reached for his sword. But they were too close, moving too fast. Riella tackled the first one, driving her shoulder into his gut. They went down hard, rolling in the mud. She came up on top, her knife already moving. He blocked, but she was faster. The blade found his throat. She spun, looking for the other 2. One was engaged with a guard, the other had the king pinned against a wagon, their swords locked. Riella grabbed her bow from where she'd dropped it, knocked an arrow, aimed. The raider's head snapped back. her arrow sprouting from his eye. The king shoved the body away, breathing hard. I said, stay safe. You're welcome. Around them, the battle was turning. The raiders were retreating, melting back into the forest as quickly as they'd appeared. The king called for a head count. 3 soldiers dead, 7 wounded. It could have been worse. It should have been worse. They were testing us, Riella said, staring at the tree line. I know. This wasn't random. They knew we were coming. The king's expression went grim, which means someone told them. A traitor in their ranks. Someone feeding information to the enemy. Riella's blood ran cold. We need to find out who before they strike again. Agreed, but first, he turned to face her fully. Thank you for saving my life. Don't make me regret it. The ghost of a smile crossed his face. Then he was moving again, barking orders, organizing the cleanup. Riella helped where she could, but her mind was racing. The raids, the perfectly timed attack on their camp, Corvin's words echoing in her head. You're just a pawn. When the real players move, you'll be the first to fall. This was bigger than corruption, bigger than stolen supplies. Someone was trying to start a war, and they were just getting started. They reached the first raided village 2 days later. Nothing could have prepared Riella for what she saw. The buildings were burned to skeletal frames, black against the gray sky. Bodies lay in the street, covered with whatever cloth the survivors could find. The smell hit her first, smoke and death, and something worse she couldn't name. She dismounted, her legs unsteady. Old Mara emerged from the ruins of what used to be her house. She saw Riella and stopped, her weathered face crumpling. You came back, Mara whispered. Riella crossed the distance and pulled the old woman into a hug. Mara's shoulders shook with sobs she'd probably been holding back for days. I'm sorry, Riella said. I'm so sorry. They came at night. We didn't have time to... Mara pulled back, wiping her eyes. They weren't after supplies. They wanted to kill. To terrorize. This was personal. The king approached, his expression carved from stone. How many survived? 32, Mara said, out of 90. The number hit like a punch. Riella's vision blurred, rage and grief warring in her chest. Who did this? The king asked. Don't know. They wore no colors, no insignia. Just came in and... Mara's voice broke. Riella knelt beside one of the covered bodies and lifted the cloth. A woman. Maybe 40. She'd been someone's mother, someone's wife. Now she was just another casualty in a war most people didn't even know was being fought. This stops, Riella said quietly. Today. Now. Whatever it takes. The king was silent beside her. When she looked up, his eyes were blazing with the same fury she felt. Gather the survivors, he said to his officers. Get them food, medicine, shelter. And someone find me the trail these raiders left. I want to know where they went. The soldiers scattered. Riella stood, her hands clenched into fists. I'm going after them. Not alone, you're not. Then come with me. But I'm not waiting for a committee to debate the best course of action. People are dying. The king studied her face. Then he turned to his second in command. You're in charge here. Continue the aid efforts. We'll be back. Sire, I must advise against Mom. Your advice is noted. The king was already moving toward his horse. Captain Vance and I are going hunting. Riella mounted up, her heart pounding. This was reckless, stupid, exactly the kind of unnecessary risk the king had told her to avoid. But sometimes the only way forward was straight through the fire. They rode hard, following the trail the raiders had left. Broken branches, disturbed earth, the occasional dropped weapon. The tracks led deeper into the forest, away from the main roads. They're heading for the mountains, Riella said. There are caves up there, old mining tunnels. Perfect place for a hideout. They pushed the horses faster. The sun was setting when they spotted smoke rising from a valley ahead. Riella held up a hand, signaling a stop. They dismounted and moved forward on foot, keeping low. The raider camp spread out below them. Maybe 40 fighters gathered around fires, celebrating their victory with stolen wine and looted supplies. Riella's rage crystallized into cold, hard focus. We can't take them all, the king said quietly. Don't need to, just need to cut off the head. She pointed to a tent at the center of the camp, larger than the others. Better guarded. That's where their leader is. The king looked at her. You're thinking about sneaking into an enemy camp, in the dark, surrounded by 40 armed raiders, to assassinate their commander? Yes. That's insane. You have a better idea? He was quiet for a long moment. Then he started removing anything that would make noise, his sword, his armor pieces, anything metal. When this goes wrong, try to stay alive long enough for me to regret agreeing to it. Despite everything, Riella smiled. Deal. They waited for full darkness. Then they moved. Silent as shadows, they crept down the hillside and into the camp. Riella's heart hammered against her ribs, every sense screaming danger. They slipped between tents, avoiding the firelight, moving when the guards' backs were turned. The commander's tent loomed ahead. 2 guards stood at the entrance, alert but not expecting trouble. Riella looked at the king. He nodded. They moved as one. Riella took the left guard, her knife finding the gap between helmet and collar before he could scream. The king took the right, his hand over the man's mouth as his blade struck home. They lowered the bodies silently and pushed into the tent. A man sat at a desk, studying a map by candlelight. He looked up, startled, then recognition flashed across his face. Riella's world tilted. She knew him. Cade Merrick smiled. Hello, Riella. I was wondering when you'd figure it out. The knife felt too heavy in Riella's hand. Her entire body had gone numb, shock spreading through her veins like ice water. Cade stood slowly, his smile widening. He looked different than he had in the borderlands. Harder, meaner, like he'd stopped pretending to be anything other than what he was. You look surprised, he said. The king's sword whispered free of its sheath. Step away from the desk. Slowly. Cade ignored him, his eyes locked on Riella. Did you really think I delivered that letter out of spite? That I was just being petty? Riella's voice came out rough. You set this whole thing up. Not the whole thing. Corvin and his friends had their operation running long before I got involved. But when you wrote that letter, he laughed. You handed me the perfect opportunity. Get you to the capital, let you dig into the corruption, watch the king fall in love with the idea of being a reformer. And while everyone's distracted with trials and investigations, we move our real pieces into place. The raids, the king said. You're behind them. I'm coordinating them. There's a difference. Cade moved around the desk, casual as if they were discussing the weather. See, Corvin and the others, they were thinking too small. Stealing supplies, making money. But I saw something bigger. A kingdom distracted by internal corruption is a kingdom that doesn't see the real threat until it's too late. Riella's mind raced, trying to understand. What threat? The borderlands don't need to be saved, Riella. They need to be independent. Their own kingdom, free from the capital's incompetence. His voice took on an almost religious fervor. We have resources. Fighters. People who've learned to survive without help. We don't need a king who remembers we exist twice a year. We need to stand on our own. By murdering innocent people? The king's voice could have cut glass. By burning villages and terrorizing children? By making it clear that the old system is dead? Cade's hand drifted toward his sword. The people in those villages, they'll thank me eventually, when they're citizens of a free borderlands instead of subjects of a king who abandoned them. You're insane, Riella whispered. I'm practical. You of all people should understand that. He looked at her with something almost like pity. 2 years, Riella. 2 years you survived out there, and you still came crawling back to the capital the second he gave you a kind word. You could have been part of something real. Instead, you're still playing soldier for a system that threw you away. The words hit harder than they should have, because part of her, a small, vicious part, wondered if he was right, if she'd been seduced by the idea of redemption instead of seeing the larger picture. Then she remembered old Mara's face, the bodies in the street, the child she'd found clutching a burned doll. You're not building anything, she said, her voice steady despite the rage shaking through her. You're just destroying and calling it revolution. History will decide that. History will remember you as a butcher. Cade's smile faded. Pity. I'd hoped you'd understand. His hand closed around his sword hilt. But if you won't join us, you can't leave here alive. Neither of you. He drew and lunged in one smooth motion. The king blocked, steel screaming against steel. Riella moved on instinct, circling to flank, her knife ready. But the tent flap burst open, and 3 raiders poured in, weapons drawn. She killed the first before he fully registered her presence, her blade opening his throat. Spun and drove her elbow into the second's face, hearing bone crunch. The third got a slash across her arm, hot pain flaring, before she put her knife through his ribs. Across the tent, the king and Cade traded blows with brutal efficiency. They were evenly matched, both trained fighters, both willing to kill. Shouts erupted outside. The camp was waking up. "We need to move!" Riella grabbed a torch from the wall and threw it into a pile of supply crates. Fire caught immediately, spreading with hungry speed. The king landed a heavy kick to Cade's chest, sending him stumbling back. "Go!" They burst from the tent into chaos. Raiders scrambled, some running for weapons, others trying to put out fires that were already consuming tents. Riella and the king sprinted for the tree line, arrows hissing past their heads. She heard Cade shouting behind them, rallying his forces. They'd be pursued. They had minutes at best. They crashed through the underbrush, branches tearing at their clothes. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit grew louder. Horses, war cries, the organized chaos of fighters who'd done this before. "The horses," the king gasped. "Where?" "North, quarter mile." They ran harder. Riella's lungs burned, her wounded arm throbbing with each heartbeat. Blood ran down to her fingertips, leaving a trail even she could follow. They reached the horses, mounted, kicked into a gallop just as the first raiders broke from the tree line. An arrow caught the king's mount in the flank. The horse screamed and went down, throwing him hard. He hit the ground and didn't move. Riella wheeled her horse around, her heart in her throat. Raiders were closing fast, 20 seconds, maybe less. She jumped down, grabbed the king under the arms, and hauled with strength she didn't know she had. He groaned, semi-conscious. Blood ran from a gash on his forehead. No time. No choice. She got him across her saddle like a sack of grain, mounted behind him, and drove her heels into the horse's flanks. The mare bolted, carrying double weight, but running like she understood what was at stake. Arrows fell around them. One grazed Riella's shoulder, another line of fire to match the cut on her arm. She leaned low over the king's unconscious form and rode harder than she'd ever ridden in her life. The sounds of pursuit faded. Either they'd given up or she'd gotten far enough ahead to lose them in the darkness. She didn't slow down to find out. She rode until the horse was foaming, until her own vision started to blur from blood loss and exhaustion. Only when she saw the lights of their battalion camp ahead did she finally let herself breathe. Guards rushed forward as she half fell from the saddle, the king sliding down after her. Hands caught them both. "Get the physician," someone shouted. "Now!" The world tilted. Riella felt herself being lowered to the ground, felt pressure on her arm where the cut was worst. "Stay with me," a voice said. "Don't you dare pass out." But darkness was already pulling her under, and she was too tired to fight it. Her last thought before unconsciousness took her was that Cade had been right about one thing. This was bigger than corruption, and it was far from over. She woke to pain, sharp, immediate, radiating from her arm and shoulder. Riella tried to sit up and gasped as fire shot through her muscles. Easy. A hand pressed her back down. The battalion physician loomed over her, his weathered face creased with concern. "You lost a lot of blood. Don't make my work harder by tearing the stitches." The king, awake, demanding to see you actually, won't rest until I tell him you're stable. The physician finished wrapping her arm in clean bandages. "You're both lucky to be alive. Whatever happened out there? Where is he?" The physician sighed and pointed to a tent across the camp. "Try not to rip anything open on your way." Riella stood carefully, testing her balance. The world swayed, but held. She made her way to the king's tent, guards stepping aside to let her pass. He sat at a field desk, maps spread before him, a bandage wrapped around his head. He looked up when she entered, relief flooding his face. "You're awake." "So are you." She sat in the chair across from him before her legs could give out. "We need to talk about Cade." "I know." His voice was grim. "I've already sent word back to the capital. Every available soldier is being mobilized. If Cade is planning a full rebellion, he is. He basically admitted it." Riella leaned forward, ignoring the protest from her shoulder. "This whole thing, The corruption, the raids, getting me involved, it was all designed to destabilize the kingdom while he built his forces in the borderlands. He can't have that many fighters. He doesn't need an army. He needs enough loyal people to hold key positions, disrupt supply lines, make governing impossible. She rubbed her face with her good hand. He's been planning this for years. We're playing catch-up. The king was silent for a moment, his expression dark. Then we need to change the game. How? By giving the borderlands what they actually need, not what Cade claims they want. Independence through violence, but real support, infrastructure, representation, a voice in how they're governed. Riella stared at him. You want to reform the entire system, in the middle of a crisis. I want to prove Cade wrong. Show the borderland people they don't need to burn everything down to be heard. He met her gaze. And I need your help to do it. I'm one person. You're the person they'll listen to. You survived 2 years in exile. You came back and exposed the corruption that was bleeding them dry. You're the proof that the system can change. Or I'm the exception that proves the rule. Then be exceptional. The intensity in his voice startled her. Riella, I can send soldiers. I can allocate resources. But I can't give them hope. You can. You already did just by existing, by refusing to stay beaten. She wanted to argue, wanted to point out all the ways this could fail, all the reasons she was the wrong person for this. But she thought of the villages, the survivors, the people who'd watched her ride out with the king's forces and maybe, just maybe, started to believe things could be different. What do you need me to do? She asked. They spent the next 3 days in brutal preparation. The king sent riders back to the capital with orders to mobilize every available resource. Medical supplies, building materials, skilled workers, everything the borderlands would need to rebuild. Not just emergency aid, but long-term investment. Meanwhile, Riella worked with the battalion to organize protection for the vulnerable villages. They set up defensive positions, trained locals in basic combat, established early warning systems. It was exhausting work, made worse by her injuries. But every hour she spent helping people felt like reclaiming something Cade and his conspirators had tried to take from her. On the 4th day, a messenger arrived with news from the capital. The king read the dispatch, his expression darkening with each line. When he finished, he handed it to Riella without a word. Corvin had escaped custody. Morel and 2 other arrested council members had vanished from their holding cells. No sign of forced entry, no witnesses. Someone had let them go. There are more traitors, Riella said quietly. In the palace itself. People I should be able to trust. The king's hands clenched into fists. This goes deeper than we thought. Cade said he was moving pieces into place. These could be his agents. Or they could be opportunists taking advantage of the chaos. The king stood, pacing. Either way, we can't trust the capital's security, which means we need to force Cade's hand before he's ready. How? By giving him a target he can't resist. The king looked at her. Me. Riella's blood ran cold. No. Think about it. Cade wants to prove the king is weak, that the capital doesn't care about the borderlands. If I stay here, personally overseeing reconstruction, showing the people I'm committed, you'll be painting a target on your back. I already have one. Might as well make it useful. She stood, moving to block his path. This is suicide. Cade has fighters everywhere. The moment you're exposed, the moment I'm exposed, he has to act. And when he does, we'll be ready. The king's eyes held hers. We can't keep reacting, Riella. We need to control the battlefield. This is how we do it. She wanted to argue, wanted to tell him it was reckless and stupid and exactly the kind of thing she would do, which meant it was definitely a bad idea. But she saw the logic, saw the strategy underneath the risk. If we do this, she said slowly, we do it smart. Controlled environment, our people in position. At the first sign of trouble, we spring the trap. The king nodded. I'll need someone I trust to coordinate security. Done. Someone who knows the territory and can spot threats. I said done. Someone willing to tell me when I'm being an idiot. Despite everything, she almost smiled. That's what you keep me around for. His expression softened. Among other reasons. The moment stretched between them, heavy with things unsaid. Then Boots approached outside, and they stepped apart as an officer entered with another dispatch. More villages reporting raids, 3 more this time, hitting simultaneously across different territories. Cade was escalating. The king read the report, his jaw tight. "Send word to the 2nd Battalion. I want them positioned here and here." He marked the map. "And double the patrols around reconstruction sites." The officer saluted and left. Riella studied the map, seeing the pattern. "He's testing our response time, seeing how thin he can stretch our forces. Which means he's planning something big." The king traced a line across the map. "If I were him, I'd wait until we're maximally deployed, then hit a high-value target when we can't respond quickly." "Like a visit from the king." "Exactly." They worked through the night, planning every possible angle, every contingency. Where to make the announcement, how to secure the location, which forces to keep in reserve. By dawn, they had a plan. Riella didn't like it. Every instinct screamed that they were walking into a trap. But sometimes the only way to win was to spring the trap yourself and make sure you controlled what happened next. The announcement went out the next morning. His Majesty the Alpha King would personally oversee reconstruction efforts in the borderlands. He would meet with village leaders, assess needs, and remain in the territory until every displaced family had shelter. It was broadcast from every courier station, posted in every town square. Within hours, the entire kingdom knew. Riella watched the message go out and felt her stomach clench. Now they waited. The response came faster than expected. 2 days after the announcement, scouts reported movement in the northern territories. Large groups of armed fighters, moving with purpose toward the king's current location. Cade was taking the bait. Riella stood in the command tent, coordinating positions. They'd chosen a village for the king's inspection that had good defensive terrain, hills on 2 sides, clear sightlines, multiple escape routes. It looked like a vulnerable position. It was actually a kill box. The king would arrive with a small honor guard, just enough to look legitimate. The real force was hidden in the surrounding hills, ready to close the trap when Cade's fighters committed. If it worked, they'd capture Cade and break the rebellion before it could gain momentum. If it failed, the king would be dead, and the kingdom would descend into civil war. "Stop thinking about worst-case scenarios," the king said, appearing beside her. "That's literally my job right now." "Your job is to trust the plan." "I do trust the plan. I don't trust luck." He smiled slightly. "Good. Luck is for amateurs." They reviewed the positions one more time. Everything was in place. The hidden forces knew their signals. The escape routes were clear. All that remained was the waiting. The king would arrive at the village at midday. If Cade attacked, it would likely be at dusk. Low light, long shadows, easier to create chaos. Riella would be in the hills with a detachment of archers, providing overwatch and ready to reinforce wherever needed. The hours crawled past like wounded animals. She watched the sun track across the sky, watched the village below go through the motions of normal life, while soldiers crouched hidden and ready. Families prepared meals, children played, none of them knowing they were sitting in the center of a battlefield that hadn't started yet. The king arrived precisely on schedule, his honor guard small and professional. He toured the village, speaking with families, inspecting the rebuilding efforts, playing his part perfectly. Riella's hands tightened on her bow. Dusk approached. The light shifted from gold to orange to deep purple. And then the attack came. Not from the direction they expected. From the village itself. Raiders burst from buildings where they'd been hiding, disguised as refugees. 20 fighters, maybe more, moving with coordinated precision toward the king. Riella's heart stopped. They'd been inside the defensive perimeter the whole time. "Signal the troops," she shouted, already moving. "Converge on the village center." She ran down the hillside, her wounded shoulder screaming protest. Ahead, she could see the king's guard forming up, trying to protect him as raiders closed from all sides. Arrows flew. Steel rang against steel. People screamed. Riella hit the village at a dead run, her bow forgotten, her sword in hand. She cut through the first raider she reached, momentum carrying her forward. Ducked a wild swing and opened another fighter's leg. Kept moving, fighting toward the king. She found him surrounded, his guard down to 3 men, all of them bleeding. He fought with controlled fury, his sword work precise even in chaos. A raider broke through, blade aimed at the king's back. Riella threw her knife. It caught the fighter in the throat. and he dropped. The king spun, saw her, and something like relief flashed across his face. "Behind you!" she screamed. He ducked. Her second knife, pulled from a dead raider, whistled over his head and into the fighter behind him. Then the battalion forces hit like a hammer. Soldiers poured into the village from all sides, overwhelming the raiders with sheer numbers. The fight turned brutal and brief. Raiders tried to flee and were cut down. Those who surrendered were immediately restrained. Within minutes, it was over. Riella stood in the center of carnage, breathing hard, covered in blood that was mostly not hers. The king approached, equally disheveled but alive. "You saved my life. Again. Stop putting yourself in situations where I have to." "Where's Cade?" one of the officers shouted. "Anyone see their commander?" They searched the bodies, questioned the survivors. Cade wasn't among them. Riella felt cold certainty settle in her bones. He wasn't here. What? This was a diversion. He sent his fighters to die while She spun, scanning the horizon. "Where's the real target?" The king's eyes widened. "The capital." While every available soldier was deployed to the borderlands, while the king was away and the palace guard was stretched thin, Cade would strike at the heart of the kingdom. And the freed council members, Corvin, Morel, and the others, would let him in. "We need to get back," Riella said. "Now." But even as she said it, she knew they were too far away. Even riding at full speed, it would take 2 days to reach the capital. 2 days for Cade to burn everything to the ground. The king was already moving, shouting orders. "Fastest horses, minimal supplies. Anyone who can't keep pace stays behind." They assembled in minutes, 20 riders, including Riella and the king. They left the battalion to secure the borderlands and took off at a punishing gallop. Riella pushed her horse harder than she ever had, but it felt like swimming through mud. Every mile they covered, Cade was already ahead. They rode through the night, changing horses at outposts, barely stopping. Dawn of the second day found them approaching the capital. Smoke rose from the city center. "No," Riella whispered. They galloped through the gates to find controlled chaos. Buildings burned. Bodies lay in the streets. Mostly palace guards and soldiers who'd tried to resist. Citizens cowered in their homes. A squad of city guard rushed to meet them. "Your Majesty, thank the gods, the palace is under siege. Rebels took the East Wing hours ago. We've been trying to push them back, but—" "How many?" the king demanded. "Maybe 100 fighters, but they have hostages, council members, staff, anyone who was inside when they attacked." The king's expression went deadly calm. "Take me there." They rode for the palace, picking up reinforcements as they went. By the time they reached the main courtyard, they had maybe 50 soldiers, nowhere near enough for a frontal assault, but better than nothing. The palace loomed ahead, smoke pouring from windows, the bodies of guards scattered on the steps. And standing at the main entrance, sword in hand and looking entirely too pleased with himself, was Cade. He saw them coming and smiled. "About time," he called out. "I was starting to think you'd missed the show." The king dismounted slowly, his hand on his sword. "Let the hostages go, Cade. This is between us." "Oh, I don't think so." Cade gestured, and fighters appeared in the windows above, crossbows aimed. "See? I've got a whole palace full of people who'd really like you to be reasonable right now. So here's how this works. You surrender, peacefully, and I'll let them live. You fight, and everyone dies. Starting with the council members you care so much about." Riella's mind raced. Cade had them cornered. They couldn't storm the palace without getting the hostages killed, but surrendering meant handing Cade everything. "What do you want?" the king asked, his voice level. "What I've always wanted. The borderlands, free and independent. A new kingdom with new rules." Cade's smile widened. "And you, on trial for abandonment and negligence. Publicly executed as a symbol of the old regime. Nothing personal, you understand, just politics. And if I refuse? Then your people die, one at a time, starting with—" Cade pulled a figure forward. Old Chancellor Dren, hands bound, looking terrified. "This one. You have 10 seconds to decide." Riella's hand went to her bow. She could make the shot. Maybe. If the angle was right, if her shoulder held, if Cade didn't move. Too many variables. Too much risk. The king looked at her. "Don't. We can't just I said don't. He stepped forward, raising his voice. I'll surrender. On one condition. Cade raised an eyebrow. You're not exactly in a position to negotiate. Let everyone else go. You want a symbol? Fine. Take me. But the hostages walk free. Your Majesty, no, Dren started. Cade laughed. You know what? Sure. Why not? Makes for a better story anyway. The noble king sacrificing himself for his people. He gestured to his fighters. Release them. The hostages were pushed out. Council members, servants, guards who'd been captured. They stumbled down the palace steps, some crying, others looking shell-shocked. The king started forward. Riella grabbed his arm. This is insane. It's the only play we have. There has to be another way, not one that doesn't get people killed. He looked at her, and his expression softened. You were right, about everything, the corruption, the neglect, all of it. I was a coward, hiding behind walls and reports while people suffered. He touched her face gently. Thank you for making me see it, for making me better. Don't, she whispered. Don't say goodbye. I'm not. I'm saying trust yourself. You don't need me or anyone else to validate what you know is right. He pulled away and walked toward Cade. Riella's vision blurred. This couldn't be happening. They'd come too far, fought too hard. An idea struck her, desperate and probably stupid, but better than watching him die. She turned to the nearest officer. Get the freed hostages to safety, then mobilize every soldier in the city. I want them surrounding this palace in 20 minutes. Ma'am, they have the king. I know, do it anyway. As the officer ran off, Riella approached the palace steps. Cade had the king now, a knife to his throat, looking triumphant. Cade, she called out. He looked down at her. Come to watch? Come to make a trade. His eyebrows rose. You don't have anything I want. Don't I? She spread her arms. You wanted to prove the king doesn't care about the borderlands, that he'd sacrifice them for his own power. But here's the thing. He just surrendered himself to save people. That kind of ruins your narrative. Cade's smile faltered slightly. Riella pressed forward. But me? I'm the perfect symbol. The disgraced officer, exiled to the borderlands, who came back and exposed the corruption. The people there know me. Trust me. If I stand with you voluntarily, it legitimizes everything you're trying to do. You'd never try me. Let him go. Take me instead, and I'll publicly support your cause. I'll tell the borderlands that independence is the answer. She locked eyes with Cade. You know I'm worth more to you than he is. He's just a symbol. I'm proof. The king shook his head slightly, his eyes screaming no. Cade studied her face, calculating. You're bluffing. Am I? You said it yourself. I survived 2 years in exile. I know what it's like to be abandoned. Part of me agrees with you. The system is broken. She took a step closer. So here's your choice. Kill a king and make a martyr, or recruit the one person who could actually convince the borderlands your way is right. For a long moment, Cade said nothing. Then he smiled. You always were smart, Riella. Smarter than you had any right to be. He shoved the king forward and beckoned her up the steps. Riella climbed, her heart pounding. She passed the king and he grabbed her arm. Don't do this, he whispered. Trust me, she whispered back. She reached Cade, who immediately grabbed her and put the knife to her throat where the king's had been. There, Cade said loudly. Everyone wins. The king goes free, I get my symbol, and we can finally... Riella drove her elbow into his ribs, twisted out of his grip, and shouted, Now! Crossbow bolts rained from every rooftop surrounding the palace. Riella had positioned archers there days ago, during the initial security sweep. They'd been waiting for her signal. Cade's fighters dropped like puppets with cut strings. Cade himself stumbled back, a bolt in his shoulder. He looked at Riella with betrayal and fury. You? I lied. She picked up a sword from a fallen fighter. Funny how that works. Soldiers stormed the palace from all sides. The remaining raiders tried to fight, but were quickly overwhelmed. Within minutes, it was over. Cade collapsed against a pillar, blood seeping through his shirt. This doesn't change anything. The borderlands will get the support they need. Real support, not your version of freedom built on corpses. Riella stood over him. You were right about one thing, though. The system was broken. But you don't fix something by burning it down. You fix it by doing the hard work of making it better. Cade laughed wetly. Naive. You think he'll actually follow through? He's a king. He will. Because I'll make sure of it. She looked back at the king, who was climbing the steps toward them. And if he doesn't, I'll write him another letter. Despite everything, the king smiled. Guards hauled Cade away. Medics rushed to treat the wounded. Servants began the overwhelming task of assessing damage. Riella stood in the wreckage of the palace entrance, her whole body shaking with adrenaline crash. The king appeared beside her. That was the stupidest, most reckless thing I've ever seen anyone do. You literally just surrendered yourself to a terrorist. Different kind of stupid. Is it though? He pulled her into a hug, careful of her injuries. She let herself lean into him for just a moment, feeling the solid reality of him alive and breathing. We won, she said against his shoulder. We survived, he corrected. Now comes the hard part. She pulled back. Which is? Actually fixing everything we promised to fix. Riella looked around at the damaged palace, the exhausted soldiers, the city still recovering from attack. The work ahead was enormous. Impossible, maybe. But she'd done impossible before. One thing at a time, she said, starting with making sure the borderlands get everything they were promised. The king nodded. Agreed. And I'll need someone to oversee it. Someone the people trust. You have someone in mind? I do, actually. He looked at her seriously. But it requires a title, and authority, and a permanent position at court. Riella's breath caught. What kind of position? I was thinking royal emissary to the borderlands. Full autonomy, direct access to the treasury for approved projects, and a seat on the council. She stared at him. You can't just create a position like that. I'm the king. I can create whatever I want. The council is about to be restructured. Half of them are under arrest. The other half owe their lives to you. His expression softened. You've earned this, Riella. Not because I'm giving it to you, but because you've proven to everyone that you deserve it. A tear she didn't expect stung her eyes. I don't know if I can. You can. You've been doing it already. This just makes it official. She thought of the borderlands, the people who'd survive another winter, the villages that would rebuild, stronger this time, the children who wouldn't grow up wondering if their king remembered they existed. Okay, she said, but I have conditions. Of course you do. Full transparency in all aid distribution, monthly reports to the public, not just the council. And any policy affecting the borderlands has to be reviewed by representatives from the borderlands themselves. The king considered this, then he extended his hand. Deal. She shook it, feeling the weight of what she'd just accepted settle onto her shoulders. It was heavy, but she'd carried worse. The days that followed were a blur of activity. Trials for the conspirators, funeral rites for the fallen, diplomatic negotiations to prevent panic from spreading beyond the capital. And through it all, Riella worked, coordinating supply shipments, meeting with borderland representatives, building the framework for a system that would actually function instead of just looking good on paper. The king made good on his promises. Resources flowed, policies changed. The council, reformed and chastened, voted through measures they would have rejected a month ago. Word spread through the borderlands that the she-wolf who'd been exiled had returned, and this time she had the king's ear and the authority to make real changes. Some people celebrated, others remained skeptical. Riella didn't blame the skeptics. She'd been one of them not long ago. But slowly proof accumulated. Villages rebuilt with quality materials, not scraps. Medical supplies arrived on schedule. Roads got repaired properly, not just patched. People started to believe. And one morning, 3 weeks after the siege, Riella stood in the same council chamber where she'd been condemned 2 years earlier. This time, she wasn't in chains. This time, she wore the formal uniform of a royal emissary, the king's seal on a chain around her neck. This time, when the council members looked at her, she saw respect instead of contempt. The king stood at the center of the chamber. We're here to formally recognize Captain Riella Vance's full exoneration and her appointment as royal emissary to the borderlands. Applause rippled through the chamber. Not universal, there were still plenty of nobles who resented her, but genuine from enough people that it mattered. The king continued, But there's one more matter to address. He turned to her. Captain Vance, you've proven your loyalty, your competence, and your dedication beyond any doubt. You've changed this kingdom for the better. And you've changed me. Riella's heart started pounding. What was he doing? Which is why, he said, his voice carrying through the chamber, I'm asking you to do something even harder than reforming a broken system. He knelt. The entire room gasped. Riella Vance, he said quietly, will you stand beside me? Not as an emissary or an advisor, but as an equal. Will you be my Luna? The world stopped. Riella stared down at him, her mind reeling. This was insane, impossible. She was a disgraced officer who'd spent 2 years in exile. You didn't go from that to Luna. It didn't work that way. But she looked around the chamber and saw faces watching, waiting. She saw a possibility where there'd been none before. And she realized the question wasn't whether she deserved it. The question was whether she was brave enough to accept it. To stand in front of everyone who'd ever doubted her and say, I'm worthy. Not because you gave me permission, but because I proved it. She held out her hand. The king stood and took it. Yes, she said clearly, but I have conditions. Despite the solemnity of the moment, he smiled. I'd expect nothing less. The chamber erupted, some in applause, others in shock, all in recognition that something fundamental had shifted. Riella Vance, the woman they'd tried to destroy, had become the one thing they never saw coming, someone who refused to stay broken. And as the king raised their joined hands, she looked out at the crowd and felt something she hadn't felt in years. Not just vindication. Hope felt dangerous. Riella had learned that the hard way. Hope was what got you hurt, when the world proved it didn't care. But standing there with her hand clasped in the king's, watching faces shift from shock to calculation to reluctant acceptance, she couldn't stop the feeling from spreading through her chest like warmth after frostbite. The king didn't let go of her hand as the chamber slowly emptied. Council members filed out in clusters, already whispering, already planning their responses to this development. Some looked genuinely pleased. Others wore expressions that promised future complications. When the last of them had gone, Riella finally pulled her hand free. You should have warned me, she said. If I had, you would have said no. You don't know that. He gave her a look that said he absolutely knew that. She turned away, pacing to the window. The city spread below, still bearing scars from Cade's attack, but already rebuilding. Everywhere she looked, people were working, clearing rubble, repairing buildings, moving forward because standing still meant dying. This changes everything, she said quietly. Yes. Half the kingdom is going to think you've lost your mind. Probably. The other half is going to assume I manipulated you somehow. Let them assume. The king moved to stand beside her. I don't care what they think. I care what's right. And you think this is right? I think you're the strongest person I've ever met. I think you see problems everyone else ignores and solve them in ways no one else would consider. I think the kingdom needs someone who refuses to accept that this is how we've always done it is a good enough reason to keep doing it. He looked at her. And yes, I think marrying you is right. For me, for the kingdom, for everyone who needs proof that merit matters more than bloodline. Riella's throat tightened. What if I fail? Then you fail, and we try something else. His voice softened. You don't have to be perfect, Riella. You just have to keep being you. She wanted to believe it, wanted to accept that maybe, finally, things could be different. But 2 years in exile had taught her that wanting something didn't make it true. I need time, she said, before any formal announcement, before we start planning ceremonies or making this official. How much time? I need to go back to the borderlands, see the reconstruction for myself, make sure the promises we made are actually being kept. She met his eyes. And I need to prove, to myself more than anyone, that I can do this job without your protection. That when people respect me, it's because I earned it, not because I'm standing next to you. The king was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded. 2 months. You have 2 months to do whatever you need to do. Then we make the formal announcement. And if I come back and say I can't do this, then I'll respect that decision. But I don't think you will. His confidence should have annoyed her. Instead, it steadied something inside her that had been shaking since he'd knelt in front of the entire council. 2 months, she agreed. She left the capital 3 days later, riding with a small escort toward the borderlands. The king had wanted to send a full battalion for protection. She'd negotiated him down to 5 guards and a supply wagon. The journey took a week. With each mile, Riella felt the weight of the capital lifting from her shoulders and a different kind of pressure settling in its place. Out here, titles didn't matter. Survival did. The first village they reached was one she'd lived near during her exile. The place looked different now. New buildings rising where burned ones had stood, real roads instead of mud tracks, children playing who looked fed instead of hollow. Old Mara appeared from one of the new houses, spotted Riella, and broke into a run that was impressive for a woman her age. "You came back," Mara said, gripping Riella's arms. "We heard rumors, but you actually came back. I promised I would." "People promise lots of things." Mara looked her over critically. "You look different, fancier." Riella glanced down at her travel clothes. Still practical, but definitely better quality than what she'd worn in exile. "Some things changed. Heard you're going to be Luna." News traveled fast. "Maybe, if I can figure out how to do that without losing myself in the process." Mara snorted. "You survived 2 winters here eating nothing but pine bark and stubbornness. I think you can handle some court politics." "Pine bark wasn't that bad." "You're a terrible liar." Mara pulled her toward the village center. "Come on, people will want to see you." They gathered quickly, familiar faces mixed with new ones, refugees from other villages who'd relocated here during the rebuilding. Riella stood in the middle of them and felt something shift in her chest. These were her people. Not because some ceremony said so, but because she'd bled for them, survived alongside them, refused to forget them when it would have been easier to move on. "The aid shipments," she said. "Are they arriving on schedule?" A man she recognized, Joran, the blacksmith, nodded. "Every week, regular as sunrise. Quality materials too, not scraps." "And the medical supplies?" "Doctor came through last month, set up a permanent clinic in the next village over." This from a woman holding a baby. "My daughter had fever. Would have died before. But the medicine, it worked. She's fine now." Riella felt her throat tighten. "Good, that's good." "Is it true?" someone called out. "What they're saying about you and the king?" "Depends what they're saying." "That you're going to marry him, become Luna." The crowd went silent, waiting. Riella looked around at their faces, weathered, skeptical, but willing to hope if she gave them reason. "He asked," she said honestly. "I haven't decided yet." "Why not?" Joran asked. "You'd have real power, could make sure the capital keeps its promises." "Maybe. Or maybe I'd get swallowed by court politics and lose the ability to do anything useful." She shook her head. "I need to know that what we've built here, the changes, the reforms, I need to know they'll last whether I'm Luna or not. Otherwise, we're just replacing one broken system with another." Mara studied her with sharp eyes. "You're afraid?" "Yes." "Of what?" "Of becoming someone I don't recognize. Of forgetting what it was like to have nothing and nobody." Riella's voice roughened. "Of letting you all down." "Well, that's stupid," Mara said bluntly. "You've already proven you won't forget. You came back, didn't you? When you could have stayed in the capital, comfortable and safe, you came back." "She's right," Joran added. "Look around, Riella. This—" He gestured at the rebuilt village. "This happened because you refused to give up. Because you made the king actually see us. You think we're going to let you walk away from that kind of power?" "I'm not walking away." "Then stop making excuses and accept what you've earned." Mara's tone softened slightly. "You want to prove you deserve it? Fine. Prove it by using the power to keep fixing things, not by running away because you're scared of losing yourself." The words hit like a physical blow. Because Mara was right. That's exactly what she was doing, finding reasons to say no because accepting meant trusting herself with something precious, and trust was still a foreign language. "I'll think about it," Riella said quietly. "You do that." Mara patted her arm. "In the meantime, come help me fix my roof. Storm damage last week, and I'm too old to climb ladders anymore." Riella spent the rest of the day doing manual labor, fixing roofs, hauling water, helping clear land for new construction. Physical work that left her exhausted but centered. That night, sitting by a fire with her small escort, one of the guards spoke up. "If I may, ma'am, why are you doing this?" Riella looked up from sharpening her knife. "Doing what?" "Manual labor. You're the royal emissary. You could delegate this work." "Could. Don't want to." "Why not?" She considered the question. "Because the moment I stop being willing to get my hands dirty is the moment I stop understanding what people actually need. Sitting in meetings and reading reports, that's important, but it's not the same as being here, seeing the problems firsthand, feeling them." The guard nodded slowly. His Majesty chose well. "We'll see." She spent 6 weeks traveling through the borderlands, visiting every village that had received aid, checking on reconstruction progress, listening to complaints and suggestions. She organized town meetings, trained local representatives, established communication networks so problems could be reported directly instead of disappearing into bureaucratic channels. And everywhere she went, people asked the same question. "Are you really going to be Luna?" She still didn't have an answer, until she visited this village where the massacre had happened. The place had been rebuilt, new houses, new fields, a memorial in the center listing the names of everyone who'd died. But the scars remained visible in the survivors' eyes, in the way children flinched at loud noises, in the careful way people moved through their days. Riella stood at the memorial, reading names she'd known. The woman who'd taught her to preserve food, the man who'd shared his last bit of firewood, children who'd barely had a chance to live. "We don't forget," a voice said behind her. She turned to find a young woman, maybe 20, with burn scars running down one side of her face. "I'm sorry," Riella said. "I should have—" "You couldn't have known Cade would attack here." The woman's voice was flat, exhausted. "But you came anyway. You and the king. And then you caught him." "Yes." "Is he dead?" "Awaiting trial. It'll be public. Everyone will get to see justice done." The woman nodded. Then she asked quietly, "Will it matter? Justice? Will it bring them back?" "No." The honesty seemed to surprise her. "Then what's the point?" Riella looked back at the memorial. "The point is making sure it doesn't happen again, making sure no one else has to lose people they love because someone decided power was more important than lives." She turned to face the woman fully. "I can't bring them back, but I can make their deaths mean something. By fixing the system that let this happen, by building something better. And you think becoming Luna will let you do that?" "I think turning down the power to make real change because I'm afraid of it would be the most cowardly thing I could do." The words came out before she'd fully processed them, but once spoken, they settled into truth. These people, your people, they deserve someone who'll fight for them with everything they have, even if it's uncomfortable, even if it's scary. The woman studied her face for a long moment. Then she held out her hand. "Then do it. Become Luna, and don't let them make you soft." Riella clasped her hand. "I won't." That night, she wrote a letter to the king. "I accept, but we do this my way. No massive ceremony, no months of planning, nothing that takes focus away from the work that actually matters. And I keep my position as royal emissary. Being Luna doesn't mean I stop doing what I was hired to do. Also, I'm terrible at court etiquette, and I'm not learning. Fair warning. R." His response arrived 3 days later. Agreed to all conditions. Though I should mention my advisors are already having collective nervous breakdowns about the lack of ceremony. I find it deeply entertaining. Come home when you're ready. I'll be here. D. Home. When had the capital become that? Maybe when she'd stopped running from it and started fighting to change it. She returned to the capital 6 weeks after leaving, riding through gates that no longer felt like enemy territory. People in the streets recognized her now. Some cheered, others stared. All of them knew who she was. The king was waiting in the courtyard, looking both relieved and amused. "You're early." "Finished what I needed to do." And you're stuck with me. Hope you're ready for that." He smiled, genuine and warm and transforming his usually serious face. "I've been ready since you called me a tyrant in writing." "You were a tyrant." "Was I?" "You got better." He pulled her into a kiss that was probably too public and definitely too intense for the middle of the day. But Riella didn't care. She kissed him back, tasting relief and promise and the beginning of something she'd thought she'd never have. When they finally broke apart, she was breathing hard and half the courtyard was staring. "So much for dignity," she muttered. "Overrated anyway." The next 2 weeks were chaos. The king made the formal announcement, and the kingdom erupted in reactions ranging from celebration to outrage. Riella ignored most of it and focused on work, finalizing borderland reconstruction plans, reviewing trade agreements, meeting with representatives who had actual concerns instead of just opinions. The ceremony, when it finally happened, was smaller than traditional Luna coronations, but still more elaborate than Riella was comfortable with. She wore formal dress that felt like armor and tried not to fidget as various officials recited blessings and oaths. The council chamber was packed, nobles, diplomats, representatives from every major territory. And in the back, standing with the borderland delegation, she spotted old Mara wearing what looked like her best dress and a deeply skeptical expression. Riella caught her eye and had to suppress a smile. The king stood beside her at the center of the chamber, looking every inch the ruler he'd grown into. When it came time for the vows, he spoke clearly. "I choose Riella Vance not because tradition demands it, but because she makes me a better king, because she sees problems I miss and solves them in ways I never would, because she's proven that strength isn't about power, it's about refusing to break when everything tries to break you." His eyes met hers. She earned this position 100 times over, and if anyone doubts that, they haven't been paying attention. Riella's turn. She'd been dreading this part, but now that it was here, the words came easier than expected. "I accept this position on one condition, that it changes what Luna means. I won't be decoration or a political prop. I'll be a voice for people who don't have one. I'll be uncomfortable and inconvenient, and I'll push back when pushing back is necessary." She looked around the chamber. "If that's not what you want, speak now. Because once I accept this, I'm not changing who I am to make anyone comfortable." Silence filled the room. Then someone started clapping. Then another. Then more, until half the chamber was applauding and the other half was too shocked to do anything but stare. The king took her hand. "Then by the authority vested in me, I name you Luna of this kingdom, equal in power, partner in rule, and the woman brave enough to tell me when I'm wrong." He placed a circlet on her head, simple silver, none of the elaborate goldwork traditional Lunas wore. She'd picked it herself from the treasury, choosing function over ostentation. It felt heavy, but she'd carried worse. The ceremony concluded with a formal presentation to the assembled crowd. Riella stood beside the king, looking out at faces that ranged from genuinely supportive to openly hostile, and felt strangely calm. This was going to be a fight. Every day, probably. People would test her, challenge her authority, try to undermine her at every turn. But she'd spent 2 years surviving conditions that should have killed her. She'd exposed a conspiracy that reached the highest levels of government. She'd helped stop a rebellion and capture a traitor. She could handle some difficult nobles. After the ceremony, there was a reception that Riella endured rather than enjoyed. She shook hands, accepted congratulations, and tried not to look too eager to escape. Finally, as sunset painted the sky in shades of fire, she managed to slip away to a balcony overlooking the city. The king found her there a few minutes later. "Hiding already?" he asked. "Strategic retreat. There's a difference?" "Barely." She leaned against the railing, watching lights begin to flicker on across the capital. "This is real, isn't it? This actually happened." "Having regrets? Honestly? I'm terrified. This is more responsibility than I ever wanted. More visibility, more expectations, more ways to fail spectacularly. And yet you accept it anyway. Because the alternative was walking away, and I'm done walking away from hard things." She looked at him. "But I need you to promise me something." "What?" "When I screw up, and I will screw up, don't protect me from the consequences. Don't use your authority to shield me from criticism or make my mistakes disappear. I need to earn respect honestly, which means accepting when I'm wrong." The king considered this. "That's going to make my life significantly harder." "Good. You've had it too easy." He laughed, a real one, not the diplomatic chuckle he used in public. "Fair enough. Though I reserve the right to defend you when criticism crosses into outright slander." "I can live with that." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the city settle into evening. Somewhere below, people were going about their lives, eating dinner, putting children to bed, worrying about tomorrow's problems. Most of them would never know the full story of how close they'd come to civil war or how many people had fought to prevent it. That was fine. Riella didn't need them to know. She just needed them to be safe. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now we get to work. You've got a council meeting tomorrow morning to discuss borderland infrastructure improvements. I have a trade negotiation with the eastern provinces. Then we're both expected at a dinner with foreign diplomats who are very curious about my unconventional choice of Luna." Sounds exhausting. "Welcome to ruling. When do we get a break?" "In about 40 years, if we're lucky," Riella groaned. "I'm already regretting this." "No, you're not." He was right, she wasn't. Despite the fear and the overwhelming responsibility and the certainty that she was going to make mistakes, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Purpose. The next morning, Riella attended her first council meeting as Luna. She walked into the chamber expecting hostility and got a mix of wariness and cautious respect. Progress, of a sort. The meeting covered infrastructure improvements, trade agreements, and resource allocation. Riella listened carefully, taking notes, asking questions when things didn't make sense. At one point, Councillor Brandt tried to redirect funds from borderland reconstruction to a pet project in the capital. Before the king could respond, Riella spoke up. "No." Brandt blinked. "I beg your pardon?" "The borderland funding is non-negotiable. We made promises, and we're keeping them. If your project is worthwhile, find funding elsewhere." With respect, Luna, these decisions require careful consideration of, "I've considered it. The answer is still no." She met his gaze steadily. "Unless you'd like to explain to the borderland representatives why their medical clinics are being delayed so we can build a decorative fountain?" Several council members hid smiles. Brandt's face reddened, but he backed down. The meeting continued. Riella made 3 more interventions, all focused on ensuring resources went where they were needed, rather than where they were politically convenient. When it finally ended, the king caught her arm as they left. "That was impressive." "Was it? Felt like barely controlled chaos. You shut down Brandt in under 30 seconds. I've been trying to do that for years." He was being ridiculous. Yes, but most people are too intimidated to call him on it. The king smiled. "You're going to be very good at this. Or very fired. I'm the only one who can fire you, and I'm absolutely not doing that. Give it time." The weeks that followed established a rhythm. Riella split her time between council meetings, borderland oversight, and learning the 1,000 small details of court life that nobody bothered to explain properly. She made mistakes, misjudged political alliances, offended a visiting dignitary by being too blunt, accidentally started a minor diplomatic incident by questioning a treaty clause nobody had questioned in decades. But she also started to see results. Borderland infrastructure improved faster than projected. Medical clinics expanded. Schools opened in villages that had never had them. Representatives from the territories began attending council meetings, their voices heard for the first time in generations. And slowly, grudgingly, the capital started to accept that maybe this unconventional Luna knew what she was doing. 3 months after the ceremony, Riella traveled back to the borderlands for an inspection tour. What she found made her stop in the middle of the road and just stare. The village where she'd spent her exile, the place that had been half-collapsed buildings and desperate poverty, had transformed. New construction everywhere, gardens growing, children running between houses that had solid walls and real roofs, and in the center of it all, a statue of her. Riella dismounted and walked closer, her heart pounding. The statue wasn't elaborate, simple stone, maybe 8 feet tall, but the inscription at the base read, "She came back." Old Mara appeared beside her. Surprised? Horrified. Who approved this? The village council. We took a vote, was unanimous. I don't need a statue. It's not about what you need, it's about what you mean. Mara gestured at the rebuilt village. You gave us hope when we had none. You fought for us when nobody else would. This, she tapped the statue's base, this is us saying thank you, and reminding ourselves that things can change if someone's willing to fight for it. Riella's eyes stung. I didn't do this alone. No, but you started it, and sometimes that's the hardest part. They stood together in silence, watching the village go about its business. Children played, adults worked. Life happened, ordinary and precious. It's working, Riella said quietly. What we're building, it's actually working. Of course it is. We're not stupid. Given half a chance and actual support, people can do amazing things. Mara looked at her. Question is, what are you going to do next? Next? You fix the borderlands, mostly. Establish systems that'll keep running without you breathing down everyone's necks. So what's your next project? Riella hadn't thought that far ahead. She'd been so focused on proving the borderland reforms could work that she hadn't considered what came after. I don't know, she admitted. We'll figure it out, because you're Luna now. You've got power. Use it. The answer came a month later, during a routine council meeting. They were discussing legal reforms when Riella noticed a pattern. Most of the proposed changes benefited nobility and wealthy merchants while doing nothing for common citizens. Not out of malice, necessarily, just because the people writing the laws didn't think about anyone else. She interrupted the discussion. I want to propose a new position, public advocate, someone whose entire job is representing citizens in legal matters and ensuring laws don't disproportionately harm them. The council stared at her. With respect, Luna, Brandt said carefully, we already have systems for citizens to, systems that require money, education, and connections most people don't have. I'm talking about someone who works for the people, funded by the crown, with authority to challenge unjust laws directly. That would be highly irregular. So was appointing a disgraced exile as royal emissary. We did it anyway, and it worked. She looked around the table. The borderlands proved that when you actually listen to people and give them support, things improve. Let's apply that same principle here. The debate that followed was intense, but Riella had learned how to navigate council politics. When to push, when to compromise, when to appeal directly to the king for support. 3 weeks later, the position of public advocate was approved. Riella immediately nominated someone for the role, a young lawyer from the lower districts who'd been fighting for legal reform for years with no resources and no backing. When the woman was sworn in, she looked at Riella with tears in her eyes. Thank you. You have no idea what this means. I have some idea, Riella said quietly. Use it well. That night, lying in bed beside the king, Riella stared at the ceiling and tried to process everything that had changed. Can't sleep? The king asked. Thinking. About? About how different everything is. 6 months ago, I was living in a cabin that barely kept out the cold. Now I'm Luna, living in a palace, making decisions that affect thousands of people. Having regrets? No, just adjusting. She rolled to face him. Do you ever worry we're not doing enough? That we're missing problems right in front of us? Every day. But that's why we keep pushing, keep asking questions, keep listening to people like that lawyer you just appointed. He tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. You've changed this kingdom more in 6 months than most rulers do in decades. Give yourself credit for that. It doesn't feel like enough. It never will. That's how you know you're doing it right. The full moon ceremony happened a year after the initial Luna coronation. Tradition dictated it should be an elaborate affair with foreign dignitaries and formal protocols. Riella negotiated it down to something simpler. Important people only, minimal ceremony, focus on substance over spectacle. She stood in the great hall as the moon rose, visible through the massive windows. The king beside her. The council arrayed before them. Representatives from every territory in attendance. The high ritualists began the traditional words. Blessings for the Luna, prayers for the kingdom's prosperity, all the ceremonial language that had been used for centuries. When it came time for Riella to speak, she'd prepared something different. Tradition says I should talk about duty and honor and service, and those things matter. But what matters more is this, she gestured to the crowd. Every person in this room represents people who are counting on us. Not to be perfect, not to have all the answers, but to try, to listen, to keep fighting for them even when it's hard. She looked at the borderland representatives. A year ago, your territories were dying. Now they're thriving, not because I'm special, but because we finally gave you what you should have had all along, resources, support, and a voice. Then at the council. You've resisted almost every reform I've proposed, fought me at every turn, and you know what? Sometimes you were right. Sometimes my ideas needed work. Sometimes compromise made them better. That's how this should work. Not blind obedience, but honest debate. Finally, at the king. You asked me to stand beside you as an equal. I'm holding you to that. When I think you're wrong, I'm going to say so, loudly, probably in front of people. And I expect you to do the same for me. He smiled. I wouldn't have it any other way. Riella turned back to the crowd. I'm not a traditional Luna. I won't be decorative or silent or content to let tradition dictate what's possible. I'm going to keep pushing, keep questioning, keep fighting for people who need someone on their side. She paused. And if that makes you uncomfortable, good. Comfort is the enemy of progress. The silence that followed could have been hostility or shock or both. Then someone started clapping. Old Mara, standing with the Borderland delegation, applauding with fierce pride. Others joined in, slowly at first, then building. Not everyone, but enough. The king took her hand and raised it high. The Luna of this kingdom, partner, reformer, and the woman who proved that the only limits that matter are the ones we accept. The ceremony concluded with traditional gifts presented from each territory. Riella accepted them graciously, even the ones that were clearly chosen to send political messages. But the gift that mattered came later, when the formal events had ended and she finally had a moment alone. A letter, delivered by a Borderland messenger. Inside was a simple message signed by representatives from 15 villages. Thank you for remembering us. Thank you for coming back. Thank you for proving that we matter. We won't forget. Riella folded the letter carefully and tucked it into her pocket. That was why she'd accepted this position. Not for power or prestige or revenge against people who'd wronged her, but for this, the knowledge that she'd made a difference, that people who'd been abandoned had been brought back into the light. Everything else was just details. 5 years later, Riella stood on a balcony overlooking the Borderlands, watching the sun rise over territory that no longer looked like the forgotten edge of civilization. Roads connected thriving villages. Schools taught children who had futures now, instead of just survival. Medical clinics saved lives. Markets bustled with trade. The king joined her, carrying 2 mugs of tea. Nostalgic? A little. This is where it all started, really, where I learned what it meant to have nothing. And now? Now I make sure other people don't have to learn that lesson. She took the tea, warming her hands on the mug. The Eastern Territories are next. They're in almost as bad shape as the Borderlands were. I know. I've already approved your proposal for a regional emissary program. Really? The council agreed? After 3 months of debate and 16 revised proposals, yes. They've learned that fighting you is exhausting. Riella smiled. Good. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the world wake up. Somewhere below, people were starting their days, cooking breakfast, opening shops, arguing about ordinary things instead of fighting to survive. It wasn't perfect. There were still problems, still injustices, still work to be done. But it was better. Measurably, undeniably better. And Riella had learned to take victory where she could find it. Do you ever miss it? The king asked. The simplicity of before? When you didn't have all this responsibility? She considered the question honestly. Sometimes. Life was easier when my biggest concern was whether I'd have enough firewood for winter. She looked at him. But easier isn't always better. I'd rather have hard work that matters than easy comfort that means nothing. Even when the work is impossible? Especially then. He pulled her close, and she leaned into him, feeling the solid warmth of someone who'd seen her at her worst and chosen her anyway. We did it, you know, she said quietly. We proved them all wrong. We did. Though I think you did most of the proving. Team effort. If you say so. She looked out at the Borderlands one more time, remembering the woman who'd arrived here in chains, stripped of everything, convinced her life was over. That woman was gone, replaced by someone stronger, harder, more determined. Someone who'd learned that falling down didn't mean staying down. That losing everything just meant you had nothing left to lose. And that made you dangerous in the best possible way. Riella Vance had come to the borderlands as a disgraced exile with nothing but anger and stubbornness keeping her alive. She left as Luna, having transformed not just herself, but an entire kingdom. And she wasn't finished yet. Not even close. The world was full of people who needed someone to fight for them. Systems that needed breaking and rebuilding. Injustices that needed exposing. And now she had the power to do something about it. She'd earned that power, proved she deserved it, and she'd be damned if she wasted it. The future stretched ahead, uncertain and challenging and full of possibilities. Riella had never been more ready. She'd survived the worst the world could throw at her. Everything else was just practice, and she was very, very good at not giving up. The sun continued its rise, painting the sky in shades of gold and promise. A new day, a new fight, a new chance to prove that one person, refusing to stay broken, could change everything. Riella had always loved a challenge. This one was going to be spectacular.